Release that which I by Ermu. Chapter 721, Artillery Exercise. Erlen was quite surprised seeing the parade of the soldiers of the First Army climb up the wall in order. Known as the Star Knight of the Western region, he was naturally familiar with the training of knights, and knew how difficult it was to ensure that people kept order while marching in a group. Whether for knights or mercenaries, when they were under a lord's purview, their numbers in each row would be no more than 5, for if the horizontal line became too long, it would be very easy to become disordered, giving the audience whose seats were far away the sight of a messy eyesore. In general, the difficulty of keeping order increased exponentially with the number of soldiers. But in this group, the number of soldiers was over 100, with more than 10 soldiers in each column and row, and all of them were in uniforms of the same color with bright ribbons diagonally across their chests, making them look like a moving square. This visual impact gave Erlen an unstoppable momentum. Once the formation was maintained, the advantage of keeping a large group became most incisive. This could also be seen from the enthusiastic response of the crowds around him. Look at the third row. There is my boy. They're marching in such good order. All of them look like one person. If two armies are confronting each other on the battlefield, I'm afraid that the enemies will be frightened out of their wits just by seeing this kind of formation. I think they'll be fleeing just on hearing the name of His Majesty. What's the name of this song? I don't know, but I feel full of strength. That's the effect made by Miss Echo's magic power. It's a pity that May couldn't witness this, Irene said, holding the arm of Morning Light. If she were here seeing it, she'd surely have been able to reproduce the exciting scene in the drama. She's pregnant. Of course, she can't stand on the city wall in the chilly wind with you. Erlen shook his head and said with a smiling face. Rest assured that you'll definitely get another chance. I bet there'll be more and more activities like this in the future. Both the review of knights and artillery exercises were the means for the Lord to show his power. The current strength accumulated in Neverwinter was beyond everyone's imagination. There was no doubt that His Majesty was capable of conquering more territories. With such a troop, it would not be surprising that he could even take all of the 4 kingdoms under his dominion when the time came. Demonstrations like this one would be absolutely necessary in order to overawe the people. My dear, would you like to join this team? Irene asked abruptly. What? Morning Light was a little shocked. I can feel it, Irene said, smiling at him. Your heart is beating fast. Is it? Erlen exhaled a white breath. He realized that even if his father did not say the words at that time, he would not be a teacher for his whole life. Sir Eltec was right. If he really liked books, he would not have decided to be a knight at the very beginning and would not have done his best to earn the reputation, the well-known Morning Light. The army was the best place for him. He wanted to join the First Army and become His Majesty's sword, to fight for the king and to play a role in expanding the kingdom's territory to an unprecedented scale. Although His Majesty had said that he, a knight who had surrendered, would have no chance to pick up a weapon again, there were other ways to join the First Army, according to his father. He wondered to what extent His Majesty's advisor department had developed now. He watched the artillerymen entering the shooting positions as if he had seen himself in the future. The music stopped. This was an indication to be ready for the firing. Vanner gave the order to take aim. 6 long-song cannons that were set at the widened area of the city wall dropped the barrels to point at the cages 300 meters away, a distance to which shells would keep flying straight to the target without falling. Because it was uncertain whether the demonic beasts' bodies would trigger the fuse, they must keep the muzzles lower so that the shells would hit the snow under the cages. My God, this one is so ugly. Nelson whistled. The mortar team he was in charge of was aiming at a large wolf-bear hybrid. The beast probably had felt a gloomy foreboding and was struggling to get rid of the shackles. The huge body crashed hard against the bars, making the cage shake constantly. Be serious, Vanner frowned and warned. This isn't the usual training. Everyone is watching us. I'm a little nervous, Cat's Claw said, his voice a bit stiff. Being stared at by so many people makes me want to pee. Many members at the scene shared the same feeling. Yeah, it's more uncomfortable than confronting the Duke's knightage before. If you miss the target, you'll be laughed at by all of the citizens. Just do it as you did in the previous exercise. No more nonsense. Danner shot Cat's Claw a glance. Remember not to mistake the live shell with the headless shell. If something goes wrong, detention will be waiting for you. Now, load. After entering the loading process, everyone at the spot suddenly got busy. No matter how they felt now, they had been so familiar with the procedure after the long period of training that they would be able to complete it even with their eyes closed. The loading of the 152mm Longsong cannon was much faster than the 12-pound field artillery cannon. After all of the 6 cannons were ready, Iron Axe's voice of countdown was heard from the top of the wall. 10, 9, 8. At the same time, the noise of the audience came to an abrupt end, as if everyone was waiting for the moment when the muzzles burst out flames and thunder. But Danner was unexpectedly calm in his heart. Looking at the demonic beasts roaring crazily in the cages, he recalled the days 4 years ago when his younger brother had died of famine and cold in his arms, when he had practiced day and night for eating one more egg, when he had fought the demonic beasts on the rubble-built city wall with pikes. The changes that had taken place in recent years were vivid before his eyes. 5, 4, 3. He had only been an ordinary miner in the old street of border town. He did not make up his mind to stay in the militia to defend His Majesty's land against demonic beasts until His Majesty had said to him, "I have faith in you. Keep it up." But even so, he did not expect things to come to this state today. Danner secretly turned his head and looked at the gray-haired man in the distance, Roland Wimbledon, who had made him calm. As long as His Majesty stood behind him, no matter what kind of enemy stood in front of him, he would not retreat. 2, 1. Fire! Fire! Danner waved down his arm abruptly. At the same time, 6 Longsong cannons spewed out long flames and green smoke, accompanied by the huge boom that turned the snow on the wall into flying white mist. Within a blink of an eye, the shells shot across the distance of 300 meters. When people heard the deafening bombarding bang, the shells had dropped in front of the hybrid demonic beasts. The compressed fuse triggered the double-base gunpowder in the warhead, blasting away 6 mud pillars in a flash and smashing the wooden cages. The beasts' seemingly sturdy bodies were like paper swirling in front of rampant waves. The flakes of wood mingled with hot and bloody flesh were flying straight up into the sky. Meanwhile, intestines and broken limbs scattered all around. The crowd suddenly burst out fanatic cheers. Chapter 722, Resplendent Blaze. According to Roland's plan, the firing would not stop once it had started. The first 5 rounds of the volley turned around 20 beasts, in the first row, into ashes. Then, in the free shooting time, the rapid firing, emptying ammunition, paired with the ignition of black powder, created a grand roaring momentum. Thus, as the firing continued to ring out, the atmosphere created by this scene ushered in a new upsurge. The frequent blasts created a cloud of almost endless dust that made the surrounding 1,500-foot radius look like an impending doomsday. Occasionally a ricocheting stone would crush a cage, and if the beast survived it would flee, choosing to run away, instead of rushing to the wall. Fear had overridden their bloodthirsty instincts. However, only a few would escape this land of the dead. The strong waves radiating from underground had already begun to rupture their guts, deafen their ears, and blind their eyes. Most of the fleeing beasts did not make it far before they fell back to the ground, where they were devoured by the continuing explosives. "This is nothing when compared to the war against the church," Andrea shouted while covering her ears, her face full of pride. The witches from Wolfheart stared at Andrea, eyes wide with shock. "At that time there were only 2 cannons, but we still had hundreds of flintlock gun and iron cannons of a smaller sizes. The enemy wasn't demonic beasts in cages, but the men of God's punishment army who were fast and strong." At the moment when the battle was most fierce, the bullets were flying all around the entire battlefield. If anyone were to poke their head out from the cover, they would definitely get themselves killed. That was a real battle. Amy looked shocked. "Really? No wonder the church lost the battle." Hero sighed, "It's beyond any human being's skills." "Aren't you afraid of seeing such a scene?" Broken Sword looked admirably at Andrea. Andrea smoothed down her billowing hair during an interval between the explosions and said, "Of course, you'll become accustomed to it after you've seen more. I have witnessed the whole process of a battle and personally killed 2 soldiers of the God's punishment army." She had completely forgotten that she had been as just shocked and astonished by the scenes of battle when she climbed up the city wall for the first time. It seemed that she now regarded Neverwinter as her second home, and she couldn't even control her feeling of pride when she was talking about its weapons. Most of the witches only stood there watching the show. However, Phyllis observed the events more carefully. When the demonic beasts in the first row were bombarded, she didn't care too much. Mad demons from this distance would also threaten the soldiers on the wall with their spears. When the common people were confronted with the bone spears that dropped from above as violently as a mighty storm, how long would they be able to hold their defenses against the enemy, even though their weapons, the so-called longsong cannon, were dramatically more powerful? However, when they turned their fire to the second row of cages, her expression changed. Was that the common king's reasoning for arranging the beasts in this manner? So he could gauge the cannon range? The last row of cages was over 3,000 feet from the wall. If the longsong cannon was able to hit that area, it meant that the cannon had a shooting range that rivaled that of the siege beasts, with a much higher lethality. The siege beast had always been the most troublesome demon weapon for the Union. This weapon has a striking distance that is farther than any mangonel or ballista, which made the witches have no choice but to rely on transcendence to lead the blessed army to charge into the enemy's position. In this way, even if they succeeded in crushing the siege beasts, they would not be able to avoid a large number of casualties. However, if they had a long-range striking weapon like this, it wouldn't be impossible for them to successfully defend the holy city of Tequila. Phyllis wondered if this was the ultimate weapon of Neverwinter, as well as the reason why Agatha had such faith in Roland. After she asked Ice Witch this question, she just shook her head and smiled. Setting the target 3,000 feet away was only to meet the needs of the audience, because a target further away would affect the view of the exercise. According to His Majesty, the shooting range for the new cannon was over 6 miles, 10 times further than its present range. Agatha turned her head to whisper in Phyllis's ear. In other words, it could hit somewhere out of the manipulator's sight. 10 times? Phyllis was astonished. Although she did not quite understand what foot and mile meant, a distance that was 10 times that of the current range could cover some of the demon's outposts. Did that mean, if the cannons were placed on the wall of Tequila, the shells could directly hit the demon's lair? How was that possible? How could they ensure that the weapon would hit an enemy that's out of our view? Agatha noticed her abstraction and continued to elaborate, but, to hit a target so far away is not easy. It requires a lot of calculation and improvement of the aiming equipment, and I've heard that the astrologers are working on it. It appears that His Majesty intended to write a shooting range list from which they will be able to calculate the location where the shell will hit on the basis of the pre-launch data. Through this method, the shell should hit the enemy precisely, even if it is thousands of feet away. Are you sure? Phyllis clenched her teeth. Doesn't that mean that as long as we make a few more cannons, the demons won't even be able to get near the city wall? Yeah, His Majesty said that this kind of strike would be called a scrubbing. Agatha shrugged and said, probably a name pulled from the idea of scrubbing dirty things on the ground. It's a little hard to pronounce, but it sounds very appropriate. Phyllis hesitated for a second before whispering close to Agatha's ear, Can you make the cannons? Agatha looked at her for a moment and waited for a new round of explosions to pass before saying, I know what you are asking. I did provide some of the materials in the shell, however, it takes way more than 2 people to make it. Even witches? Far from enough. Do you know how many common people work in the chemical plant of Neverwinter? Nearly 2,000 people, and the number is still growing. Agatha sighed, but what they do there is no more than make explosives from acids, greases, and gases, while the production of a cannon is a completely different system. The necessary mine and smeltery have more than 3,000 people working in them, the processing plant has over 1,500 workers, and corresponding technicians to maintain and operate the finished product. How many common people do we have that could work for us even in the tequila age? Phyllis became silent. After Arietta and Starfall City fell, one after the other, the human beings' territory retreated to the corner of the plains with a plummeting population. By the time tequila became the last shelter for all people, the number of the common people controlled by the Union was a mere 30,000 to 40,000. However, they were playing the role of supporting the combat witches, logistics, and keeping the city on course, etc. It would be impossible to find enough people to manufacture the long-sung cannons. If Agatha didn't lie to her, even the witches of tequila at that time were unable to make it, let alone the ones who had been struggling to survive in the underground maze. Suddenly, the booms from the cannon stopped. The demonic beasts, in the first 2 rows, had completely merged with the snow, turning into puddles of blurred flesh and blood. An unearthly silence hung over the wall and no one there spoke. Everyone was staring at the furthest cages as if they were waiting for something. Phyllis looked quizzically at Agatha, who just smiled back at her. "He is coming." Before Agatha finished speaking, a bright light radiated from the ground, glimmering like a shining sun. Chapter 723, Power to Shake the Sky. There was no sun in the months of demons, which was something that had not changed for thousands of years. The sky was always like a gloomy dark curtain where the snow was invariably flying and swirling in the wind. People barely noticed the difference in the weather other than the intensity of the snow. Like the weather today, that only 1 or 2 occasional snowflakes drifted down might be regarded as a sign that the snow had stopped. Most of the time, the white snow would swarm the entire sky. The heavy fall of snow would float and cover the whole land at all times. Therefore, this white light was particularly eye-catching under such a background. The moment it broke out of the earth, the glow brightened the surrounding snow in an instant, as if the entire gray world was lit up slightly. Phyllis could not help but hold her breath. Her gaze was fixed on the light in this moment when everything seemed swift and yet slow. As the light dimmed quickly and turned into an orange fireball, the ground 1,000 meters away from the wall was rooted up. This was not an illusion. She clearly saw the flat snowfield rising upwards and forming a soft arc as if the land under the snow was not made of soil and rocks, but made of water that could randomly change its shape. At the top of the arc, the red fireball was rising as if it wanted to get rid of the shackles of the earth. It succeeded. The next scene happened almost in the blink of an eye. Smoke and clouds of dust and flames erupted from the ground and tore the curved surface into pieces. The fireball skyrocketed, along with billows of black smoke rising tens of meters high, spreading a high wall that almost obscured the original light of the sky in Phyllis's vision. Both the cages and demonic beasts turned into ashes in front of the fireball. By then the earth-shattering roar came to her ears, making her tremble and her heart thud. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, the earth shook. Phyllis subconsciously clutched Agatha, to whom she moved her lips and wanted to say something but was blocked by the coming airflow. The people on the city wall also reeled from the blowing and did not come to themselves until a long while later. They, stunned by this scene, had forgotten to cheer and applaud. The only thing they could do was look up at the rising wall of smoke. Is this he? Swallowing, she had never thought that common people had mastered such a terrible force nowadays. Even a senior demon could not survive in such a turbulent underground fire. The red sun was dimming, leaving only a few scarlet flames looming in the dark smoke, but the billowing smoke had shot up to midair as if it connected the clouds. The specks of dirt and demonic beasts' pieces that had been blown up into the sky now dropped like a rain of blood and dirt in the surrounding snowfield. Looking at this scene, Phyllis finally understood where Agatha's confidence came from. With this earth-shaking power, common people would even have the opportunity to contend with brutal demons. But she still could not understand why Roland Wimbledon would call it art. Was the explosion art? She wondered. Retinine was completely intoxicated by the cold wind that was filled with the smoke of gunpowder. The boom of the blast thoroughly awakened his desire. This was chemistry. This was the real chemistry. He looked to his companions beside him, the former chief alchemist of King's City, Rayleigh, along with Archer, whose eyes, he noticed, were shining with the same light, which was irreconcilable with their aging looks. He vaguely remembered that last time he showed this kind of radiance was when he was enrolled in the alchemic workshop as a disciple at the age of 10. Retin felt that he finally found the goal to which he would devote his whole life. That was to attract everyone's attention like the sun. Only chemistry could help him achieve this goal. Unfortunately, he was nearly 50 years old. How nice it would be if he had seen this scene 20 years earlier and understood the real power of chemistry ahead of time, which was not flames and fumes given off from the burning of rough snow powders but the purer light and heat. Fortunately, he finally knew it. Looking at the stunned astrologers beside him, Retin could not help smiling. Since then, the lore of Sage would only record one name, while the other would soon be forgotten completely. He wanted to let everyone experience the power of explosions, to make them praise the greatness of chemistry. He could not hold back his urge to start more experiments. He had so many chemically explosive plans in intermediate chemistry to try. What are we waiting for? Let's apply for a lab from Kalsichi. That's what I'm thinking. The three alchemists spoke out their ideas and suggestions at the same time. Retin gave the column of smoke that lingered in midair one last look and then walked swiftly towards the laboratory. Now do you understand why I want you to stay in Neverwinter? Edith fumbled Cole's head. The latter was silent for a long time before asking in a husky voice, for this? Clearly, he was really frightened by the formidable force of the explosion, with his face still being pale and one hand clutching his sister's arm. For no one can withstand Roland Wimbledon. Edith said slowly, the aristocrats, though holding their titles and lands, mean nothing compared with this kind of power. He would make a kingdom in any way he wants it to be. When he ordered the abolition of the nobility, those aristocrats should have handed over their lands and rights. But it's a pity that most people still haven't realized it. Although she regarded it as a pity, the Pearl of the Northern region showed no expression of pity, rather she showed a feeling of gloating. Cole pouted his lips. We are aristocrats too. But we're no longer titled aristocrats. Edith said, taking her younger brother to the edge of the wall. Now that people were gradually leaving the city wall and the area had become much more spacious, Cole could clearly see the dark burned ground far away as if it had been plowed severely. Edith continued to say, aristocrats are respected for their wealth and power, not the pieces of land under their feet, which means the nobility won't truly disappear. Just like this plain, whether its surface is broken or neat, snow-covered or grassy, its nature won't change. Neverwinter is the starting point of the new era. If you want to be an aristocrat in this era, you have to integrate yourself into the new rules set by His Majesty. For a moment, Cole felt he had seen and not seen the point at the same time, but he still nodded under his sister's commanding manner accumulated over the years. I'll stay here and no longer argue for going back to the northern region. That's right. Don't you think it's far more interesting in exploring new rules and new forces than running pieces of immutable land? Cole looked up at her sister's pretty profile. Her long hair was blowing, like the silkiest satin, in the northerly wind. Her long, narrow eyelashes tilted up, accented with her elegant curve of nose and lips, giving a sight of unspeakable beauty. The only thing that puzzled him was the flush on Edith's face, something that women would have when they were excited. Is my sister interested in the skyrocketing column of smoke? Cole doubted. Cole turned away his eyes, hiding his doubt deeply in his heart. Chapter 724, A Higher Level of Power. After the exercise, Phyllis once again came to Roland's castle accompanied by Agatha. When they entered the office, she noticed that Roland Wimbledon wore the same expression as he had last time. He did not show any self-satisfaction, as if the exercise was nothing but an insignificant matter in his eyes. However, Phyllis felt that the importance of this common person sitting behind the mahogany table had apparently grown a lot. She unconsciously addressed him with honorifics. Your Majesty, please allow me to ask you a few questions before contacting the Tequila Witches. Go ahead. Roland nodded. Can the weapons you demonstrated be mass-produced? In Phyllis's view, if the plan of seeking the Chosen One did not work out well, the war against demons would undoubtedly last many years. If the production of this weapon really required nearly 10,000 common people and the output could not meet their needs, Neverwinter would still be faced with a hard war. By that time, she would be able to strive for more positions for the tequila survivors. After all, a force of about 100 God's punishment warriors controlled by witches was definitely formidable. When the Longsong cannons could not stop the siege beasts that came from all directions, Roland would have to rely on them to break through the tight encirclement. Roland smiled and gave the answer. The first thing I must point out is that the Longsong cannon isn't merely a defensive weapon. It may look too heavy to be carried by manpower or livestock, but for some vehicles, carrying them is no longer a problem. In fact, with a little improvement, it can turn into a weapon that can be used for both offense and defense. The vehicles? Phyllis repeated. She had heard from Agatha earlier that His Majesty often said some awkward-sounding new words, most of which were straightforward, and that if she did not understand, she could ask directly. Generally, the king would be very happy to answer the questions. As expected, Roland rubbed his hands and said, it would be anything that can carry the cannons, such as, the simplest, three-masted big sailing ship, which can be regarded as a vehicle. But such like big ships can only sail in the swirling sea. I'm just giving you an example. There will be a freewheeling vehicle on land in the future. Neverwinter has already embarked on developing such a vehicle, though it can do much more than simply carrying a cannon. An equipment that is capable of carrying such a heavy weapon as well as moving freely on the ground? But from the king's statement, it seems not to be prepared for cannons specifically. Just as Phyllis wanted to ask some more, Roland went on, as for the output, after a new generation of processing tools is commonly used, I believe the cannons will cover all the walls of the border in a year or two. Phyllis secretly gasped at the answer. Covering all the walls of the border in a year or two? Even mangonel and ballista cannot be produced in such a large number in such a short period of time. If so, it will be hard for the tequila survivors to play a role here. To Phyllis, it was an answer that disappointed and satisfied her at the same time. Perhaps their positions would be lower than other witch organizations, but it was always good to have less casualties in war. However, in light of her previous experiences, she decided not to question him but rather to change the subject. I understand, Your Majesty. My second question is, I noticed during the artillery exercise that the last explosion was not caused by the Longsong cannon. I'm wondering if it's your most lethal weapon? When she asked, Phyllis noticed a strange smile appear on Roland's face before he answered. Judging from the technology we've mastered, it can only be counted as the simplest one. The simplest one, she said in astonishment. You can make a weapon that could create a more violent explosion? There's no end in the development of explosion. Roland shook his head. The current level of weaponry Neverwinter possesses can be viewed as the second level, the third level will be better. At that level, it won't be impossible to burn a city into the ground in one go. Phyllis was completely startled. She instinctively wanted to consider this statement as nonsense. Crush a city in one go? No common people or witches can have this kind of power. Only deities can do it. But when she saw Roland's peculiarly shining eyes, she found it hard to deny what he had said. In the end, she had no choice but to ask in a low voice, what kind of weapon is that? Roland did not give a direct answer. He drank some tea before saying slowly, what does the scene of the last round of explosion look like in your eyes? Is this about my doubts? She closed her eyes and a moment later said, like a sunrise. If the smoke and dust were taken as clouds, the rising orange fireball would undoubtedly be the sunrise at dawn. Yes, it's just like the red light of the early morning sun. But the third level of weapon is the real sun. Roland raised the corner of his lip, as if he was narrating a thing made by God. You can't look straight at it because it'll burn your eyes, neither can you come too close to it, for the glittering light will burn you all over. Its core temperature can turn stones into gases, and the air billow it generates is strong enough to smash houses. The description made Phyllis shudder. She was unable to distinguish whether what he was saying was an overestimation or the truth. How can we make it? She asked. We have to accomplish two epic tasks. One is called resplendent radiance, while the other is called the distance to the sun, Your Majesty. Agatha interrupted him, frowning. Please don't talk nonsense at this time. Nightingale's voice also came to Phyllis's ears. Epic tasks? Resplendent radiation? Phyllis found herself unable to understand even one word, and Agatha was shrugging helplessly. Ahem, in short, it's very complicated, so I need more witches to push forward the research and speed up the technological development in Neverwinter. Roland coughed a little. Of course, the things you found in the ruin may be helpful, so I hope we can start a deeper negotiation as soon as possible. With a complicated feeling, Phyllis looked at the king, who was a common person, before taking off the ring on her finger. As promised, I'll contact Pasha and other survivors for you. When I crush this 5-colored stone, they'll sense my location, but if you want to talk directly, I'm afraid it'll take 1 or 2 more days. I don't know when Pasha can get a magic core ready. Can we have a conversation anywhere? Yes, but if the condition permits, a spacious place will be much better. Well then, you can crush the magic stone in the hall, that will make it a little formal. Roland said before he turned to Agatha and said, You take her there for me. Yes, Your Majesty. After leaving the office, Phyllis took a deep breath. She had done all she could do, next was to wait for the response from the rest of the survivors. Chapter 725, Bet and Promise. The effect of the live-fire artillery exercise exceeded Roland's expectations. He had indeed got what had paid for. In the last round of explosion, he had ignited 70% of the total black powder reserves and had got an explosion as intense as that of the roadside bombs in the modern world where he had lived before. While the soldiers had been burying the powder, he had had a sudden thought and had mixed some aluminum powder with the gunpowder. As a result, the fireball of the explosion had become even more bright. The moment it had shot out of the ground, it had looked a bit like the rising sun. With the success of this explosion, the First Army's explosives had been officially upgraded from black powder to chemical gunpowder. As for the nuclear explosives, he could only fantasize about it at this moment. There was quite a lot of uranium in the Earth's crust, which was even more than silver and gold. He could have simply asked Lucia to collect uranium, but he was unable to prevent radiation damage from nuclear fallout or manufacture qualified lead plates. The most important thing was that he didn't know whether Nana could heal radioactive diseases, namely, the biological deformation in genes caused by particle ionization. So unless he was left with no choice, Roland did not plan to start the bright radiation, a task as epic as the mythical stealing of fire. After all, it was too dangerous. After settling the issue of the Tequila Witches meeting, he invited Tilly into his office. It was time to discuss the bet with her. Roland poured her a cup of chaos drink, cleared his throat, and said, about the hunting competition. Even though Agatha is a member of the Witch Union, her team didn't represent the Neverwinter City. Tilly seemed to have already guessed Roland's thoughts and narrowed her eyes. Brother, our bet can only be considered as a draw. I won't accept it if you intend to count Leaf as part of the Neverwinter team. Of course, our bet did end in a draw. But I still want you to stay, Roland said honestly. His straightforward attitude made Tilly stutter, ugh. So, how about we count it as a double win? This was the first time that he saw Princess Tilly's speechless expression, which was actually rather adorable in his eyes. I'll use 1/3 of the profits of Chaos Drink as a fund to reward anyone, a witch or a common person, who contributes to the Neverwinter City. And you can take up residence in the Neverwinter City, either in the Witch Building or somewhere else together with the Sleeping Island Witches. As they started discussing business, Tilly soon regained her focus and coughed as if nothing had happened. Only 1/3? We had initially agreed on half of the profits. Because I estimated that even 1/3 of the profit would still be a shocking amount. It'll be enough for one lifetime. Roland explained, the rest of the money will be used for the Neverwinter City's infrastructure, including the witches' accommodation and necessary facilities, as well as salary distribution. In general, it'll be used for all the needed areas. If you need more, you can directly take it. Even if I spend all the earned gold royals? Of course, they would be wasted anyway in the warehouse if left unused, he replied naturally. In the future, when the metallic currency was no longer able to meet the productivity needs, it would be the time to start using credit currency. When that happened, the gold royals would become just a number for the government, which would print out the money directly. Given that, storing metallic money was not important for him. Tilly smirked. Sounds like a good deal. That's why it's called a double win, Roland said, don't you think? She sighed and said, since you already spoke your mind so clear, I can only agree with you. Even though she acted like she was reluctantly agreeing, her smiling eyes could not hide her real feelings. Roland could not help but smile too. He had only seen a look of suspicion on her face 1 year ago, but now she put on a relaxed smile. It seemed like she finally believed that he could bring a stable and comfortable life for the witches. Oh right. After some casual chatting, he wanted to change the topic and focused on the retrieval of the southernmost region. I plan to integrate the Sand Nation's domain into the Kingdom of Grey Castle this coming winter. Their traditions and power inheritance methods are very different from the ones in the Four Kingdoms. Thus, I need your help to completely conquer it. Next, Roland described to her the laws and holy duel ceremony of the Sand Nation. I don't have a problem with Ashes joining the duel, Tilly said after thinking for a while. But why do you want to integrate the desert? Since the Kingdom of Grey Castle was established, no ancestor had ever shown any interest in that land. It only looks deserted, but the underground fire that has never been extinguished for the past dozens of years and the plain covered by white salt are all proofs of the hidden treasures of that land. Roland waved his hand. If I'm not mistaken, southernmost region will be an indispensable part in the future development of Neverwinter. In that case, I'll explain to Ashes. Tilly did not ask for more details but nodded in accordance. Nowadays, the trust between them was slowly increasing. It was obvious that in the future, the Witch Union and the Sleeping Island witches would have a close relationship. Roland was very pleased as he thought about that. After sending his sister away, he immediately called Echo. The holy duel could only earn the right of speech for him, but it was not a long-term solution. He did not just need a clan's right to live in the Iron Sand City, but numerous Majin people that would follow him. For this, he had to become the legendary Great Chief. Roland did not have the time to lead the army personally, so he had to find a representative. As the princess of the Osha clan, Echo was a key figure in persuading the Majin people. I wonder if Iron Axe has discussed with you about returning to the southernmost region, he said directly. This winter the First Army will enter and station in the Iron Sand City, and I wish you'll go there on my behalf. No, he didn't mention anything. Echo looked surprised, then bit her lips and said with a sad expression, Your Majesty, don't you want me anymore? Hearing her first sentence, Roland was happy to know that Iron Axe understood that any military action was the kingdom's secret and had not mentioned anything about it even to his own clan member. However, her last words almost made him choke. Even though he knew what she actually meant, still, those words could be easily misunderstood. At the same time, he felt a cold breath behind him, and Nightingale's hand firmly pinched his arm. Of course not, this is temporary. Once I become the great chief of the Sand Nation, you can return with Iron Axe to the Neverwinter City. I won't force you if you don't want to. Hearing that, Echo relaxed. I understand, but the holy duel won't be enough to subdue all the Majin people. Of course, I've another plan, Roland laughed and then slowly described it to her. This? Echo was shocked and expressed her disbelief. Can this really be done? Definitely, I'm the king of Grey Castle, I give you my word, he said emphatically. By the name of 3 gods, the Sand Nation will never forget your kindness. She was not hesitating anymore, but instead she knelt and bowed respectfully. Echo is willing to complete this task for you. Very good, Roland stood up to help the Majin girl who had suffered a lot to rise. I'm counting on you. In this way, the preparations for the retrieval of the southernmost region were completed. Chapter 726, Tide of Demonic Beasts. In the depths of the maze-like cave, the tremor above their heads grew louder and louder. Pasha knew that they were quickly approaching with unstoppable numbers. She stretched her tentacles into the soil and rose above ground, where she saw everything that was happening outside the mountain. The dark mass of demonic beasts were rampaging between the mountains, and all of the entrances to the maze ruins were blocked by fearful beasts of hells. The demonic hybrids behind them were furiously tearing apart the flesh and bones of the beasts until they could open up a space between them. They had no choice, or else they would be crushed to death by the rest of the demonic beasts behind them at the cave entrance. Despite the desperate struggle of the hybrids, the passage would soon be blocked once again by the flood of demonic beasts, and the only way to get through was to repeat the previous actions. This had resulted in a bloodbath in front of the entrances before the demonic beasts even launched their attack at the core area. Chaos ensued underground as the wilderness beasts crawled around within the different layers of the earth. Their head full of tentacles could easily sense the weaker parts of the ground, and the oil-like substance on its skin allowed it to burrow through the ground effortlessly, carrying within its long tube-like body a large number of demonic hybrids. Once a monster like that broke through the defensive line, it would often incur a massive amount of casualties within the ranks of the defenders. Even some mutated flying beasts had appeared in the sky, but they could only hover in the air as they were unable to enter the underground ruin. This was an unfathomable experience. She did not directly witness the scene unfold in front of her, but whether it was the shrieks coming from above the mountains, the tremors within the layers of the earth, or the sounds of rock and soil mashing together, they were all accurately transmitted into her mind through the thousands of tentacles, forming countless vivid images. This was the largest-scale invasion of the demonic beasts since the beginning of this winter. Pasha withdrew her limbs and descended to an even deeper layer below. From time to time, some loose clumps of dirt would fall from the ceiling and smash into the braziers at the sides of the passage. She did not need the flames to see every single stone in the ground, but those who had turned into God's punishment soldiers did need them. She extinguished the flames in the braziers on her way back when everyone had already moved to the maze hall. "How's the situation above?" As she entered the hall, she heard Alethea's voice in her head. "The closest wilderness beast to us has reached the third layer." Pasha transmitted her words to everyone's consciousness. "How's the situation below the maze?" "There is nothing unusual," Alethea replied. "I only saw some charred black corpses." Pasha's perception and understanding of fighting had changed dramatically since her body's transformation. The originally flat world had suddenly become three-dimensional, and since their enemies were able to move freely in the ground, the survivors had to keep an eye out for the situation beneath them. As long as they were not standing at the end of the abyss, they should not ignore the deeper hidden threats. Fortunately, a lava river flowed endlessly beneath the ruin, which sealed the larger part of the bottom of the maze and thus spared them a lot of effort. Up until now, there has not been a demonic beast that was not afraid of fire. "How long before the instrument of divine retribution is ready?" Pasha looked at Celine. "I don't know. Half an hour, maybe 1 hour, the latter replied anxiously from the magic core's direction. "I've tried my best, but the damaged position in Area 4-3 has just been repaired and Lady Eleanor needs more time to calculate the core." "Don't worry. They won't arrive that fast," she calmed her. "The bigger demonic hybrids will be blocked outside of the cave entrances and we'll only have to handle the smaller ones." "You're right. We can just treat it as daily training," Elena said. "As long as we're here, the demonic beasts will not be able to enter the hall." "I don't think it may have been the best idea to retrieve the relic of God so early. Wouldn't it be better to have let Starfall City consume a bit more of their strength?" someone asked. "They would still have to defend Hermes. But without the God's punishment army, those common people are worthless." Alethea refuted her. "The walls can effectively block the demonic beasts, and the hot oil and mangonels can also give those beasts a good beating. We would just need to stay hidden in the pivotal secret temple and wait for a break in the city's defenses to retrieve the relic. There are many traps hidden under the cathedral. What if the enemies accidentally triggered such a trap? We would have been buried alive, which is still nothing compared to the relic falling into the hands of the demons. No matter what, we can't afford to risk it." "Stop bickering," Pasha interrupted. "Since we've already brought the relic back, we no longer have a choice but to continue with the plan." "Have you already forgotten Lady Natalia's words before the attack on the Queen of Starfall City?" After she spoke, the others were immediately silenced, all quietly agreeing with her. During the age of tequila, scenes like this were rare. The low-level witches had to obey their superiors unconditionally, and anyone who broke the rules would receive severe punishment. The union's largest ever conflict was the one between Natalia and Alice. Before Natalia cut all ties with Starfall City, she said those words to all her followers and then initiated the sneak attack on the Queen of Starfall City. Since that day, the survivors of Tequila no longer held rankings in mind, and thus internal disputes became more frequent. However, Pasha did not mind this change at all. Compared to the previously rigid system, she actually preferred an organization full of energy. Just as the others changed the subject and started to discuss ways to block the demonic beasts, Pasha suddenly received an unexpected signal from one of her tentacles. A violent tremor sounded through the earth as if a heavy object experiencing free fall crashed into the ground without any resistance. It quickly broke through several layers of the maze, and is now fast approaching the depths of the hall. How can this be possible? The ground was densely packed with soil and stones, not allowing any large movements, and even a wilderness beast would take at least half an hour to drill through a layer. How was it able to move so fast through the ground? Pasha quickly moved more of her tentacles to the direction of the movement. The more tentacles she used to watch an area, the more pictures she would receive. Then, her heart sunk. A horizontal crack of 6 to 7 miles had suddenly appeared in that area, splitting the ground into two. It looked like a long chasm that stretched all the way to the darkest depths. A wild beast was just crawling down the soft soil along the hill, tumbling down straight towards the hall. Prepare to fight, Pasha warned at full volume to everyone through their consciousness, at the direction of the magic core. Suddenly, while everyone was still in shock, the ceiling of the main hall exploded into pieces, and a long-necked wilderness beast slipped down through the gap, covered with scratches and bruises, emitting a sinister dark blue light due to the influence of the magic core. It had sustained massive damage from the crash, but even so, it completed its mission with its dying breath. The moment the beast fell to the ground, several hybrid demonic beasts tore out of its belly and lunged towards the nearest victim, Celine. Chapter 727, The Instrument of Divine Retribution. No! Pasha screamed at the top of her voice. Right after Celine took out the tentacle out of the Instrument of Divine Retribution and knocked two demonic hybrids down, she was bitten by another demonic beast. Her cumbersome blob-like body instantly cracked open. Scales and gray body liquid gushed out and splashed all over the place. Several sneaky mutated wolf species even crept up her coarse skins and clambered to her head, in an attempt to bite her main tentacles on the top. The other witches all unsheathed their swords and came to her rescue. Springing up like a streak of silver light, Elena was the fastest one. She struck a demonic hybrid who came to block her way and slashed it in half. Afterwards, she dashed into the crowd of demonic beasts and slew fiercely. The beast's blue blood spilled behind her. Apparently, these monsters, which scared common people so much, were as impotent as normal beasts in front of these gods' punishment witches who were as powerful as extraordinaries. Even in the start of this fight, when the beasts had still been in their prime, they had apparently not been in a prevailing position in terms of speed or power. As more witches joined the battle, demonic beasts were slaughtered one by one. After the short chaos came to an end at last, Pasha withdrew all her tentacles and rushed to the center of the hall, heart in her throat. Unlike a god's punishment who could easily switch her body, they, unfortunately, were stuck in the blob they had entered without an option to switch to a new one. Once their bodies were on the brink of shutting down, they would have no choice but to merge with Lady Elena. Pasha was completely satisfied with her fate. After she had resolved to follow Lady Natalia, she was prepared to sacrifice herself anytime. But Celine could not end up like this. Among all the survivors, she had done more research than anybody else on the magic core. If she was merged by the central carrier, nobody would be able to reboot the Instrument of Divine Retribution until a considerable amount of time. It would be perilous for everybody in the months of demons when danger constantly lurked around. "Are you okay?" asked Pasha anxiously, who landed next to the blob covered with wounds and scratches. "Well, not bad," Celine's answer relieved Pasha instantly. I'll be fine as long as the holes in my body are blocked. The problem lies in my tentacles. Several of them are broken and it's awfully painful. You shall find yourself lucky to still be able to sense pains. I yearn to feel them again. One voice complained. Exactly. If Phyllis hears you say that, she'll be jealous. Poor Phyllis. She can only take solace spiritually now. Don't say that. She was sent to serve ordinary people for the sake of tequila. Elena frowned. She's now called number 76, isn't she? I wonder how the plan of the chosen one goes at the moment. It has been only a short time. The Union no longer dominates the whole continent these days. It'll take us at least another 2 or 3 years to complete the mission since we can't even reach those hidden witches that easily. Or wait until the army of demons besieges and defeats us at the arrival of the bloody moon. Another voice put in. Damn, do you really want to say that like we don't know? Everybody burst into laughter at this remark. Shut up, all of you. We're still in danger. Alethea grunted. What should we do? There's a hole in the ceiling. If there's one fallen beast, there'll be another. Shall we split up and leave some of us here at the bottom of the cave? Pasha contemplated for a while and made an objection. No. If the fallen demonic beast fights with the witches who stay here only, then that won't be a problem. What if they turn around to attack the outer defense line? In that case, people who guard the entrances will be besieged. Even if we're as strong as God's punishment warriors, it'll still put us in a very difficult position. Elena gave an approving nod. I agree with Pasha. We'll be easily split up and surrounded. By then, we'll have nowhere to retreat. I bet it would be better for us to stay close together than separate. Let's gather at the center of the hall to guard the relic and the core. Once the instrument of divine retribution is repaired, we'll all be able to stay alive. I agree. So do I. At any rate, this sounds better than being bitten by a demonic beast from the back. Then let's do it. Pasha swayed her tentacles. Abandon the bottom floor and focus on the defense of the magic core. That meant they would have to confront the hybrid demonic beasts that swarmed in at the center of the hall. Without a doubt, there was going to be a fierce battle ahead of them. Fortunately, strong, gigantic fearful beasts of hell and flying species that no defense could effectively ward off could not penetrate the maze, otherwise, the situation would be much worse. Pasha felt a little distressed. The number of the demonic beasts was astonishing, but the God's punishment witches were not possessed of incessant physical strength. If the instrument of divine retribution could not be repaired in a short period of time, Pasha feared that they could not hold up for very long with so many monsters swarming in. If she had known this would happen, she should not have allowed Celine to continue with the test of the cores in the months of demons, at least not this most important one. An hour later, demonic beasts appeared at the bottom floor of the maze, and the battle officially began. All the witches fought at their best. Beyond a doubt, the result of this battle would determine whether human beings were able to survive. Pasha also joined the fight. She drew lava from the lava river and sprayed on demonic hybrids' heads. Scorching, slimy red water set the monsters' furs afire. Flames flared out. The air was heavy with a burning smell. In spite of this, the monsters still continued to swarm in and darted toward where the relic was located. The God's punishment witches soon formed a wall of flesh and blood to stop them. For God's punishment witches, as long as their skulls were not injured, they would never truly die. As such, the battle was a bitter one. Some witches were terribly bitten, but they still managed to chop off their enemies' legs and rip them open while struggling on the ground. Just at this critical moment, Celine's thrilled voice reached everybody. The core calculation is completed. The magic power mode has switched to the foreign species annihilation mode. The instrument of divine retribution is ready to go. Pasha, I'll take care of the matter here. You go activate it now. Alethea ejected a mouthful of lava and forced one of the demonic beasts nearby to retreat. She rushed to the front to cover Pasha. Among all the survivors, Pasha's key was the biggest and strongest among the keys that could activate the instrument. It was second only to Lady Eleanor's. Pasha nailed her main tentacle into the slate and sprang up. In a second, she was next to the instrument of divine retribution. She stuck out all her tentacles and tightly wrapped around the spindle-shaped core suspending in the air. Instantly, her magic power streamed from her body, and the gleam of the instrument frame started to become increasingly bright as well. Pasha could sense her magic power gradually condensed into a strange, semi-transparent polyhedron at the center of the spindle. The polyhedron looked very complicated, with numerous facets and edges, almost ineffable. Pasha realized that this was the core to annihilate foreign species. It worked the same way as the magic representation of senior witches, except it was much more powerful. When the ghostly black-blue light turned blinding pure white, the frame of the spindle opened abruptly and lit up the center of the hall, making it as bright as day. "Right now!" Celine yelled. Pasha ordered the other witches to apply their abilities. A pale blue light wave immediately escaped from the core and rippled around the hall. Within a blink, the light wave reached every corner of the hall. Chapter 728, A Surprising Communication. When the light wave went through her body, Pasha felt a queer pulling force disquiet the little magic power left in her body, as though the magic power was going to be hauled away. The magic power deprivation only lasted for a few seconds before peace was restored. In the meantime, the hall also fell silent as the magic power was tranquilized. Through the short tentacles on her back, Pasha could see that the hybrid demonic beasts in the area reached by the light wave all stiff like a statue as if they had been petrified. They then fell to the floor without uttering a sound. It was evidently the most efficient massacre. Nothing, not even soil, rocks, or brick walls, could possibly stop the wrath of heaven from advancing. Pasha could imagine what the upper floor of the maze looked like even without actually seeing it. There should be piles of hybrid demonic beasts lying dead like swarms of insects. Their magic power, which was their lifeline, would disperse in no time. Without the support of magic power, their mutated bodies would immediately lose the ability to move. Of course, there would be a few less mutated ordinary demonic beasts with meager magic power surviving the slaughter, but these unintelligent monsters could no longer pose a threat to the relic. This time, Celine had finally managed to repair the instrument in a timely fashion. Pasha pulled out the tentacle breathlessly. She looked at Alethea and said, "Go check the upper floor." Then she came to Elena and asked, "Are you holding up well?" Elena was covered with black and blue blood, half of her arm gone, her hair drenched in sweats as though she had just been dragged out of a river. "I'm fine. Everyone's alive." Pasha breathed a long sigh of relief. Looking around, she saw the witches who were still able to move were in a defense mode with their shields in their hands. As to the exhausted ones, they all sprawled across the floor, in hopes of recovering their strength as soon as possible. Although they had just undergone a fierce battle, they did not look weary or despair by any means. Instead, they all grinned and waved at her, appearing to be pretty relaxed. Apparently, everybody shared the same thought. They viewed every battle as their last one. Even if they had to devote everything to tequila, they did not regret a bit. The scene almost brought Pasha to tears. She felt a gust of warmth slowly crept into her heart like a hot spring. Every witch was equally important. Over the past 400 years, no new witches had joined them, and they had developed an inseparable bond among each other. Nothing could be better than hearing that everyone was alive. "I have to change to a new body though." Elena sighed. "It took me a long time to find this one. I don't know if there will be any new bodies stronger and more good-looking than this one." Pasha did not know whether to laugh or to cry. It was definitely not a good time to discuss this kind of matter. She tapped Elena's head with her tentacles. "Anyone else needs to change their bodies?" 5 or 6, I reckon." Elena counted with her fingers. Betty got her stomach cut in the battle, while Isa was burned by lava when she was covering Alethea. Her entire body was gone except the head. The others either lost an arm or a leg like me. They've been transferred to reserve their souls. So you decide to first pick a body you like before transferring? Of course. As I can't feel anything now, I should at least pick a body that meets my taste, Elena answered while twitching her mouth. She sheathed the bloodstained giant sword and carried it on her back, but she soon fell to the ground after stumbling a few paces. Gee, this damn body. God's punishment warriors could not feel pains or get tired, but they knew when their bodies were shutting down. Even if they were spiritually animated, their bodies of flesh would become extremely weak as though it had got out of their control. Let me take you there. Pasha scooped up Elena with her tentacles and strode to the chamber next to the hall. That was the room where all the gods' punishment warriors from Hermes without a commander gathered, from whom the survived witches would choose their new bodies. I saw some good-looking ones among the new warriors. Wow, you also care about that? Elena studied Pasha with some interest. Pasha coughed. Don't you forget, I'm also a witch like you. After all the wounded received treatment, Aletheia and Selene brought one piece of good news and one ill. The good news was that the demonic beasts in the maze were practically all dead and that all the flying species hovering outside had fled as well. Therefore, there would not be any attacks on a big scale in a short period of time. The bad news was that 2 parts of the instrument of divine retribution broke down, which might be attributed to the hasty manner in which the new core had been constructed. In conclusion, they were not going to be shielded by the instrument in the following week. The bad news made Pasha uneasy. If an activation like the one today can bring damage to the core, then how is instrument supposed to cope with the activation done by the chosen one? Does it mean that it can only be used once? The more complicated the key was, the broader the effective area of the wrath of heaven was. The effective area generated by Pasha's activation could only cover the whole maze, which was about a radius of several hundred meters, way too limited to defeat demons. By the time the instrument was filled with magic power, both she and the instrument would have been destroyed by a spear thrower. If the chosen one activated it, however, she could spread the light wave somewhere at least 10 miles away, making the instrument of divine retribution the most powerful and lethal weapon against their enemies. Selene said drily with a look of resignation, "We don't have good quality materials that could sustain magic power, save some fragile bone ware from the relic, so it's perfectly normal that they don't meet the core's standard. The instrument is, after all, the deity's product. If only the Quest Society still exists. We can use as many golds and silver as we want and don't have to mend it every time we use it. Anyway, don't test it again this winter. I don't want to go through such drama every day." Aletheia complained. "Well, we won't have such an opportunity anymore." "What?" Selene's words caught in her throat. "Hang on. What's the matter?" Pasha asked. "Look at the phantom instrument." Selene glided to another smaller magic core with the help of her main tentacle attached to the roof. The sheen of the core has changed. The 5-colored stone is broken. "What?" Both Pasha and Aletheia exclaimed with a start. A sense of evil forebodings prevailed them. Only when Phyllis had to contact the maze would she break the magic stone. It was very unlikely that she could find the chosen one within merely a month or so. There were 2 possibilities. One was that Phyllis encountered some trouble and had no choice but to turn to the maze for help. The other was that the ring had been destroyed by somebody. Either was not considered to be good news. "Can you locate her?" Aletheia questioned in a low voice. Selene inserted her tentacles into the core. "In the southwest direction, about. She should be in the territory of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, close to the entrance of the fertile plains." Numberless thoughts flashed across Pasha's mind. The western region of Grey Castle. It looks like that Phyllis has reached the destination of this trip. What could then force her to break the magic stone? Has she exposed herself by accident, or rather, witches in the new era keep a hostile attitude toward her? Can it be? No, it can't be. Pasha shook her head, trying to put these ideas behind. Most likely Phyllis had run into some difficulties. "What are you going to do?" Aletheia looked at her. Pasha said ponderously, "Turn on the phantom instrument a day later as planned." This was the shortest time within which they could manage to have the instrument ready. If the magic stone was broken by somebody with malicious intent, they would probably be exposed to ordinary people earlier than they desired. Nevertheless, in any event, Pasha would not abandon Phyllis. They were the last surviving witches from Tequila who shared the same fate and destiny. Chapter 729, Recasting the Broken Sword. Welcome to the Witch Union. Wendy unrolled the contracts on the desk and said to the witches from Wolfheart happily, "Sign after you read the pledge on the back of the contract and then you'll officially become a member of the union." They should have gone through this procedure earlier had Princess Tilly not suggested a hunting contest. Wendy did not care about who the winner would be, but she had been concerned about whether all the preparation work for the hunting had been completed. On the very day of the contest, she had been restless. Every minute had been torturing for her. Due to her concerns, she complained to His Majesty for quite a while and the subsequent canon exercise further postponed the matter. To her surprise, however, Annie, who was always the more self-controlled one, ventured to see her first. "Wendy, don't you usually test our abilities first?" Amy asked. In the 10 days after their group had arrived in Neverwinter, this airy, dainty little girl had won everybody's affections. Due to her innocent character, Amy soon established bonds with the other witches. She now felt very comfortable calling Wendy sister. "We normally test your ability after you sign the contract," Wendy answered in a soft voice. "If you have any questions or concerns regarding the terms of the contract, please don't hesitate to ask me now." "All right." Out of the 4 witches from Wolfheart, Amy was the only literate one. So Annie, Broken Sword, and Hero all sat around her to listen to the terms while exchanging their thoughts on the matter. Wendy studied the murmuring witches attentively. She recalled the day when she had signed her contract. At first, she had thought the terms were a little too generous to be true and they were very likely just an empty promise through which the prince showcased his benevolence. The terms would probably be changed completely shortly afterward, or there would be another set of implied rules that actually regulated the witch's activities. But as she soon discovered, she had been totally wrong as the basic frame of the contract had gone through very few modifications in the past 2 years. Thinking back on it, Wendy believed that she had made the greatest decision in her entire life. "Wow, 1 gold royal for us each month. Can we buy whatever we want? A paid vacation. Is it true? Witches are entitled to terminate the contract in the event that His Majesty fails to fulfill his obligations to provide safety, food or accommodations. Is this really not a lie?" Wendy answered all their questions with a smile as they asked the questions that she had done so herself. She pretty much knew exactly when the 4 witches would utter an exclamation of surprise as she had been equally astonished by the contract when reading it for the first time. In granting the witches freedom and acknowledgement, His Majesty had given them what they desired most and the fate of the Witch Union had been intertwined with that of Roland Wimbledon's ever since. Wendy believed nobody in the Union would ever abandon His Majesty, even in the event of a crisis in which Roland could no longer shelter or support them. Such a bond was not explicitly expressed in the contract, but was much stronger than any plain words or language could describe. However, she could also foresee that these thoughts and feelings of contentment would gradually diminish as newly awakened witches would have a completely different living environment. It would be a time where there was no threat from the church and no hostility from their relatives or their close family members. With that being the case, new witches would naturally feel less grateful for the new life than old witches did. Following the terms came the pledge and the signature line. There were no mandatory rules of any kind in the pledge. That part only stated that Roland and the Witch Union should act with honor and utmost good faith as it was totally voluntary to join the union. After the 4 witches read and signed the contract, Nightingale pinched Wendy to confirm to her that they had signed it with a genuine intention. "Now, we're sisters." She hugged everyone happily. The Witch Union now had 4 more members. The ability test location was outside the witch house and could be found at Leashyard Forest. Annie was the first to take the test and Wendy had learned a lot about her ability beforehand from Amy. Although Annie could increase the temperature, she could not create fire like Anna as only her palms turned warm. During the earlier stages after Annie had awakened, the best she could do was making an object as warm as a torch. After entering her adulthood and her ability had consolidated, she could heat up ironware until it glowed red. In addition to ironware, she could also melt lead and bronze. During the entire process, Annie looked upset. Wendy could tell that she did not have much confidence in her ability. Wendy fully understood why she felt this way because Annie had once been rejected by the Bloodfang Association. In fact, Wendy had seen many witches like Annie who seemed to only have useless abilities. For example, Mystery Moon and Echo were once deemed useless. Yet no matter how stupid their abilities appeared to be, they all eventually found a suitable position in Neverwinter and put their abilities to good use. A great ability. Wendy encouraged her. The machining plant in the industrial zone would love to have you. Really? Annie replied in surprise, even if I can only warm up my own palms? Of course, and on top of that, the furnace area and chemistry lab would also be glad to have you. You'll certainly become a busy woman in the future. Wendy wrote down several advisable positions on the notebook. As far as ability assessment was concerned, King Roland had a better insight into each witch's ability. Wendy knew she was not the perfect person to do the evaluation and often recorded her thoughts and asked His Majesty to review them. In this way, she could, little by little, improve herself and thus do a better job in the future. Her ability was not as powerful as most sisters and her grades were not the best either, and yet His Majesty entrusted the Witch Union to her. She dreaded failing him. Annie stepped aside, looking doubtful. The second one to take the test was Amy. Wendy felt reluctant to conduct a full assessment of her ability because Amy actually had to hurt herself in order to showcase her power, even though self-healing sounded very appealing. The only good thing about Amy's ability was that Amy did not need to worry about the negative impact of magic power bite as she constantly received minor injuries and used her power all the time. After a brief interview, Wendy noted down the position of a healer. It appeared that Amy's ability could only be used for healing. The same applied to the third witch, Hero. Since she could only transfer diseases rather than offer treatment, the only place she could work it seemed to be the hospital. Wendy remembered that the so-called plague was caused by microscopic creatures and thought that Hero could potentially help Lily conduct research on microbiology. With this in mind, Wendy marked Hero's name with a circle. She believed once Hero received universal education and gained a basic understanding of natural science theoretical foundation, her ability might experience some changes. The last one was Broken Sword. Unlike the previous three witches, the silver-haired witch had never shown her ability to Yurko or Phyllis. With this being the case, Wendy had never heard anything about her power. You can go ahead now. She nodded toward Broken Sword. Broken Sword took a deep breath and closed her eyes. As she summoned her magic power, her body started to glow and radiate. Soon she was surrounded by a blinding, flaring light. Wendy squinted her eyes and stepped back a few paces. Judging from Broken Sword's performance, Wendy judged that she was stronger than any of the other witches from Wolfheart. When the light dissipated, Wendy gasped. She could not believe her eyes. The silver-haired witch had vanished into the thin air. In the snow, where her feet had just been, stood a strange-looking sword. Chapter 730, News from the Mountains. This is your ability? It took Wendy quite a long time to recover from the shock. Annie answered, she can't hear you. After Broken Sword becomes a weapon, she'll be completely cut off from the outside world. Only when you hold her can she regain her senses through you. I didn't know it worked this way, Wendy thought. She held up the hilt gently after a moment of hesitation. In a second, she sensed another mind in her head. The blade acted with her as one as if it had become a part of her body. Meanwhile, Wendy also felt her sight and hearing improved a lot. She was full of energy and strength. Wow, this is coexistence. Broken Sword's voice popped up in her head. When you hold me, you'll gain all the strength and senses I have. There was a hint of regret in Broken Sword's voice at this moment. The sad thing is that I've been always weak since I was a kid, so what I can give you is very limited. Even if I'm fused with you, I can't be of much help. Wendy now knew that it was Broken Sword's ability that made her feel powerful. Wendy held up the weapon and studied it carefully. The hilt felt warm and soft like a living thing. The shape of the blade appeared weird. It was at an arm's length but was as slim as a finger. The front part was flat and the part close to the hilt round. It looked more like a magnified needle than a sword. If taking a closer look, she could see dense striped patterns on the blade, as though the sword were tied up with numerous fine threads. It reminded Wendy of Broken Sword's distinctive silver hair. How long can you maintain the sword shape? If I don't constantly switch back and forth, I can be a sword as long as you like. It seemed that Broken Sword's ability worked the same way as Maggie's. Only the transformation would consume a large amount of magic power. Maggie? Are you talking about that giant pigeon? Wendy did not realize what had happened until a moment later. She was a little uneasy to learn that Broken Sword could read her mind when they were combined together. There was always something she did not want anybody to know. You seem to be a little perturbed. What's this? A cloth strap? Nothing. Wendy put the blade back to the ground immediately and looked to Annie. Ahem, can anyone merge with Broken Sword? Annie inclined her head. Technically, yes, as long as she's willing to accept that person, even if he's just an ordinary man. However, in that case, Broken Sword will simply act as an extremely sharp and deadly weapon. Only witches could demonstrate her real power. Witches? Yes. Annie seemed to perceive what Wendy was thinking and replied placidly, by the way, the connection between you and Broken Sword doesn't mean that she can read your mind. As long as you don't concentrate on your thought, Broken Sword won't know what you're thinking. I see. Wendy managed to calm herself down and once again reached the hilt. Did I say something that upset you? I'm sorry. I won't recklessly ask you such questions again. Broken Sword's anxious voice came to her head at once. No, nothing, a question suddenly flashed across Wendy's mind. What will you see if I put you down without notifying you? It'll be pitch dark. I can neither hear anything nor sense anything, like I'm floating in the air. It must be terrible to be deprived of all senses, thought Wendy. At this thought, she tried to sound as friendly as possible. It's me that has to make an apology. Don't worry. I won't abandon you at random anymore. Broken Sword appeared to be struck. She responded a yes in a soft voice at last after a long silence. Right. Annie just said that only witches can demonstrate your real power? That's right. If I just fight as a normal weapon, I'll also get hurt when the person using me strikes too many blows. But witches could sharpen the blade or expand its attacking range by filling it with magic power. In that case, I'll be able to stab enemies without even touching them. Wendy started to apply her magic power to the blade as Broken Sword had instructed. The silver steel was instantly obscured by a thin layer of white light that stirred like milky fog. In the meantime, she felt the magic power in her body was decreasing rapidly. Apparently, she could not keep things going like this for very long. Urged by Broken Sword, Wendy swung the long sword at a branch of an olive tree. A gust of air streamed from the tip of the sword and cut the twig in half brusquely. This is wind? Wendy asked in surprise. The magic power you put into the sword will more or less reflect your strength. I didn't expect you're a combat witch. Broken Sword was also a little astounded. If Annie holds the sword, her power range won't exceed the length of the sword. I see. Wendy somehow thought of Anna's black fire. What would happen if Anna gave the sword a full swing with all her strength? It would probably be an earth-shattering explosion as intense as the sigil of gods will that summon thunderbolts. Nevertheless, Anna was the most crucial witch in the Union and also the beloved one of His Majesty's. It was very unlikely that she would partake in the war personally. As to the other combat witches, Wendy contemplated for a while but could not find a perfect match. Therefore, she put a circle next to Broken Sword's name as well and decided to let His Majesty determine which one Broken Sword should pair with. Roland put down the quill in his hand and stretched himself when he heard a high-pitched whistle from the dock. The whistle blew thrice, one long and two short. Its sound reverberated across the whole shipyard. That was the signal that commanded the army to get ready for the journey. After the preparation for the war was completed, the expedition corps of the First Army spent the whole morning boarding the boat. Accompanied by the roar of the whistle, the concrete boat carrying the first batch of soldiers departed the city of Neverwinter and officially commenced her voyage for Fallen Dragon Ridge. There would be more boats transporting supplies and ammunition later. Indeed, the battle to retrieve the southernmost region would not start until both new recruits and veterans assembled at Fallen Dragon Ridge. But at least, he had taken the first step. Roland glanced at his desk covered with draft plans of the internal combustion engine. As the second-generation power source that had fully replaced steam engines, internal combustion engines had played an irreplaceable role in the development of industries. They had even, to some extent, changed the course of history. Whether it was the simplest piston compressor, the more complicated combustion turbine or the latest jet, they were all powered by internal combustion engines. Roland could confidently say that internal combustion engines had, at one time, dominated the entire industry, until they were later substituted by electric motors. Beyond a doubt, as one of the most significant machines in the history of time, internal combustion engines would definitely benefit Neverwinter a great deal in the near future. The oil project at Blackwater in the southernmost region was pivotal to the whole program. If they could, by any chance, extract fuel oil, the subsequent industrial development would be a matter of course. If they, unfortunately, could not, he would then have to consider alcohol as a substitute. In that case, the industrial expansion would be greatly limited even with advanced technologies. Just at that moment, Agatha pounded the door and entered the room. "Your Majesty, Tequila's witches have gotten back to us." Chapter 731, The First Contact. In the center of the main hall, the phantom instrument had been completely laid out. With magic power filling it, its core gave off a somber and cold purple light. After the instrument had been activated, it would activate a light curtain thousands of kilometers away. Unfortunately, such an ability was way beyond the power of the witches. This was directly endowed by God. Pasha looked back and found that all of the blobs were hanging down and touching the ground. The gods' punishment witches stood abreast the mounds with serious looks on their faces. The dead hybrid demonic beasts were deliberately placed on opposite sides and under the purple light, their light blue blood reflected fluorescent spots. It looked gloomy and terrifying. If a group of common people witnessed this, they would have been frightened by such a hellish scene. Pasha did not want things to turn out like this either. After the start of decomposition, the demonic beast's remains were going to become sticky and disgusting, and difficult to clean up. Even though the gods' punishment witches would be unable to smell it, she would sense it with her tentacles. Over 400 years, the hall had come to be their home and no one wanted to mess it up, but she had to prepare for the worst. That was to say, Phyllis ran into danger and the ring had been broken by someone else. If such a disaster really happened, it would be necessary to create the most horrific atmosphere to intimidate or even threaten those who might pose threats to her. The western region of Grey Castle was near the entrance of the fertile plains, so each year many lost demonic beasts would attack it. Whoever put Phyllis in danger, whether it was witches or common people, would conclude from the stockpiled dead demonic beasts that they were very difficult to deal with. Only by making the other side clearly realize that the survivors of Tequila possessed great power, would they be able to bide time for a rescue. "Activate the instrument," Celine said. "We need to figure out Phyllis's situation." Pasha touched her main tentacles and gave an order to the instrument. Everyone immediately noticed the purple light dim as a huge purple curtain made of light enveloped the whole hall and an illusion of a scene appeared on the other side of the phantom instrument and in it the five-colored stone had been broken into pieces. Pasha was stunned and puzzled. The place in the scene was not a murky dungeon, nor a remote wilderness, but an open and spacious hall. The hall was very bright and clear and a long wooden table stood in the center of it, topped by a white tablecloth that held flowers and teacups. There were no signs of fighting, so it looked like the place had been deliberately chosen to just destroy the magic stone. Phyllis was currently standing by a window as she chatted with another witch. She noticed the light curtain and turned around with a very surprised face as she asked, "What happened? Was the hall attacked?" Pasha didn't know how to respond at the moment. Phyllis's situation did not match her assumptions. Phyllis had not been attacked or tortured, and she wasn't even in danger. In fact, she was in higher spirits now than when she had departed. Looking carefully, Phyllis wasn't wearing that cheap and vulgar maid suit. Instead, she was wearing a fine fluffy cloak, and against the gorgeous clothes, naturally, she had a good complexion. Everyone was as shocked as Pasha. They glanced around at one another, but no one opened their mouth to speak. Luckily, they became expressionless after they became blobs, otherwise, it would have been very embarrassing. Recently, the demonic beasts launched an attack, but the magic core and the relics of gods are safe and sound. We're also all alive, so don't worry. As the most seasoned, Pasha was the first to regain her senses. She then added, "But, the bodies are many and we haven't had enough time to clear them out." "Really?" Phyllis doubted. "Of course, ahem." Pasha waved her tentacles towards the gods' punishment witches behind her for emphasis. "Well, you continue to clean up the remains and remove them from the labyrinth before their fluids dry to the ground." The witches, who stood abreast with their serious looks, appeared to be extremely disappointed. "How can we throw away so many bodies? It takes us the whole day to pile them up. I don't want to touch those sticky and disgusting bodies." "You're right. Although we can't smell it, they look incredibly disgusting." "Stop complaining. Are you really willing to sleep with those bodies? Can we throw them into the lava? At most, it'll only smoke like a fire." "I can't believe you. Do you want to turn the entire ruin into a chimney?" Pfft, the blue-haired witch standing beside Phyllis couldn't keep from laughing. "My guess is, they thought that you were in danger, so they arranged this scene to intimidate us." Pasha found her voice somewhat familiar, and when she looked at her carefully, her name suddenly came to her mind. "Are you Agatha?" "What?" Celine questioned in surprise. "The youngest senior witch in history? That's impossible. She fell with tequila, didn't she? Even if she managed to escape from the holy city, how could she still have the same appearance as she did over 400 years ago?" Both of the promoted people temporarily living in the meat lumps and the gods' punishment witches made sounds of perplexity. "She's indeed that senior witch," Phyllis stated. After she had been attacked by the demons in the research tower of the Misty Forest, she used the multi-layered frozen coffin to completely freeze herself, and it killed all of her pursuers at the same time. When the Witch Union discovered the stone tower ruins, she was rescued. And that was what had happened. As she heard this, Pasha felt instantly excited, and an encouraging idea aroused from her deep heart. Phyllis had not fallen with tequila, and she quickly revealed her identity to the witches of Grey Castle. Besides, she also encountered a promoted person from tequila, so Phyllis must have a clear purpose to contact the maze. Perhaps, this senior witch would be the chosen one they had been looking for. Upon hearing this, Phyllis gave them a look of embarrassment, and she hesitated. She first glanced at Agatha before saying in a low voice, "Could you give us a moment?" "It won't take long." Agatha nodded. "When you're done, I'll inform His Majesty." Having finished, she turned around and left the hall. Then Phyllis took a deep breath and looked at Pasha again. "I've indeed found the chosen one claimed by the magic stone, but he's different from the people in our plan." "Wait a moment, he?" Pasha was stunned. Before she could ask further about it, Phyllis began to tell her about her absurd experience. About how the witches could closely collaborate with common people. About the powerful army that defeated the church. About the powerful gunpowder weapons. And, the most incredible thing, the chosen one was one of the common people. Chapter 732, An Ideal Beginning. When Phyllis told them the news, all the witches in the hall were excited. How can common people contact God? Alethia's voice was full of astonishment and incredulity. "You must be wrong about that. Are you sure that the orange beam of the light was from his body? Have all of the witches in the western region of Grey Castle checked it?" Celine directly asked the key point. These two questions were the exact thoughts of everyone. I've seen it personally. Besides, his key is so much more complex than Pasha's requirements that the 5-colored stone can't contain the mountain-like orange light. Phyllis uttered her words slowly. I couldn't believe it at the beginning either, but it's the truth. Does he have magic power? Pasha asked with the last shred of hope in her heart. It's a pity that he can't activate the instrument of divine retribution. It was a great surprise to find the chosen one, who has such a sophisticated key, in such short time, but what Phyllis had said disappointed all of them. Now that the surprise unexpectedly arrived, no one would have predicted that the chosen one had the key, but did not have magic power, a discovery that completely overturned their previous idea. Although the chosen one had the key, he could not connect to the core due to the absence of magic power, not even with the help of witches. They had fully proved in the Tequila Age that common people could not endure the harm brought by magic power, even the tough ones could only sustain for about 30 minutes. They were unable to master the key points of using it. She had thought that senior witches were likely to become the chosen one and that it would be easier to find dozens of eligible candidates in the age when the Union controlled the fertile plains. However, what worried her the most was that the news brought by Phyllis totally broke her illusions. There were over 10 higher ascendants living in the small city of Neverwinter. With such a surprising number of higher ascendants, the Witch Union was equivalent to some core organizations of the Union, such as the Quest Society and the Blessed Army that did not have more higher ascendants. Even so, Phyllis could not discover another chosen one among them. There were two totally different ideas in her mind. One was that it had been easier to eliminate the demons and that they had missed the opportunity, for they discovered the ruin too late. The other one was that they, in fact, did not have access to their targets at all and that it totally was their one-sided will to execute the plan of the chosen one. If those senior witches could not meet the requirements of the chosen one, would they be right to follow Lady Natalia and to determinately resist the God's punishment army plan of the Queen of Starfall City? Pasha felt terrified when thinking of this idea. She shook her head to calm the surging thoughts down and then asked, "Did you mention that the king of the common people wants to cooperate with us?" "He wants to know us and is willing to fight against the demons with us," Phyllis said, "but I'll only know the detailed requirements after a negotiation." "Do you think that he's capable of fighting against the demons?" "I'm not sure. His weapons are astonishingly powerful, but I pitifully know little about that." Phyllis hesitated for a while and comforted them, but Agatha is very sure about that. In her view, if Neverwinter is given 2 or 3 more years, it's very likely to confine the demons to the west of the impassable mountain range. "What does she think of the relationship between us and Neverwinter?" Alethea asked in a deep voice. In Agatha's view, she's a witch of Tequila, but she'll work for Roland Wimbledon, the king in the secular world. Phyllis paused and spoke out her thoughts of the new union. She thinks that the most urgent mission at the moment is to defeat the demons. Additionally, all forces on the continent should be unified and fight together to face the third battle of divine will. Working for common people? Has she lost her mind? Alethea shouted, "Did she forget how we lost to the demons in the first battle of divine will?" There was a discussion amongst the crowd. Almost all members of the Union must learn that period of history. There might be one extraordinary person amongst the common people, but as a whole, they had behaved badly. For example, they opened the city gate to surrender to the demons and they were all killed. The army of witches marched on from thousands of kilometers away to rescue them, but they were rejected outside the gate by the Lord, who then witnessed those witches being killed by the demons. In many cases, common people were clambering to escape from the battlefield. Sometimes, a huge army had as many as 20,000 or 30,000 soldiers, but its fighting capacity was no better than that of a witch team with about 100 people. In some places, common people even utilized God's stone of retaliation against witches, which exacerbated the breakdown between them. If not so, the human beings would not have been forced to withdraw from the big land of dawn to the fertile plains. With such bad behavior and their struggle to get food and resources, it was quite reasonable for witches to completely replace the regime of common people. Seeing Alethea wriggling the whole body to express her dissatisfaction, Pasha had the same concerns in her heart. From the descriptions Phyllis gave, Roland Wimbledon, the king of Grey Castle, was probably an extraordinary person, but he alone could not change the entirety of common people. If other kings committed stupid and rudimentary mistakes, which side would he back? If the war lasted for 20 or 30 years, would he be as determined and energized as he is now? Not all people would be willing to possess an empty body so as to lengthen their lives at the expense of senses. Even if he was willing to do it, would his offsprings agree with this in 40 or 50 years? Would they be willing to be heirs all of their lives? These were all the questions that Pasha needed to think about. Generally speaking, any cost would be worthwhile if they could defeat the demons. Both Alice and Natalia firmly believed that as long as the human beings and witches were alive, the witches would regain their glory one day, which was exactly the innate difference between God's honors and common people. However, what she was concerned about was that even though they paid a price, would they still totally defeated? After all, they would not get another chance to try. Let's first talk with Roland, Celine pressed on the indignant Alethea with her main tentacles. When I was in the Quest Society, I had dealings with Agatha. Though she was sympathetic to common people, she would think twice before an action. Additionally, given that we were planning to communicate with the kingdoms in the secular world, now that there is a king such as Roland who doesn't discriminate against witches and makes preparations for the battle of divine will in advance, isn't this an ideal beginning for us? I agree with you. We alone can't defeat the demons. We can also expand our influence among all witch organizations with the help of common people. What's more, he's helping to rope witches in, so Phyllis is more likely to find another chosen one. I'm curious about those gunpowder weapons. If we're equipped with them, will it be as easy for us to kill the demons as it is to kill demonic beasts? The gods' punishment witches talked it over with each other. Celine was right. Pasha sighed and thought that since they had to collaborate with common people, such an open king like Roland was the most suitable counterpart to discuss the matters with, regardless of the idea of a new union. They could not decide their road afterwards until the discussion. Perhaps Roland held the same thought. Thinking of this, she nodded her tentacles toward Phyllis and said, I know. Please let's talk to His Majesty Roland Wimbledon. Chapter 733, The Time Before the Past. When Roland stepped into the living room, his attention was suddenly drawn by the light curtain that sheltered half a wall. The edges of the light curtain exuded a flickering purple light as if a passageway connecting with different planes was dug through the wall. On the other side, the scene was quite dark, which looked like a huge hollow cavity under the ground. The reflections of the Red River, which flew in thin streams like cobwebs, lightened the rocky walls and the dome, vaguely showing the ancient ruin and its silhouette. Judging from the vivid visual effect, it should not be a built-up illusion, but a live broadcast transmitted from tens of hundreds of kilometers away. A giant sarcomatoid monster with its tentacles spreading was facing Roland. A strange voice sounded in Roland's head. I'm sorry for keeping you waiting, my respected King of Grey Castle, Your Majesty Roland Wimbledon. I'm Pasha, one of the survivors of Tequila. I think you must have heard of us from Phyllis. Ah, this is what direct communication means. Roland sat down facing the light curtain while being joined by Nightingale, Tilly, Agatha, Wendy, and Scroll. It's good that you've talked to each other, I don't have to introduce myself. You don't seem to be surprised by my appearance at all. Pasha was a little surprised. I thought it would take quite some time before you could accept the idea that I am indeed a witch. Because I'm really not a stranger to the sort of concepts such as appendages and prosthesis, Roland thought to himself, but he said in a peaceful voice, with the bloody moon drawing near, time is precious for both of our sides. Rather than concealing from each other and suspecting each other, it's better that we just be honest with each other from the very beginning. Since you've been the rulers of the continent, I guess you all agree with me? Pasha was startled for a moment, then burst into a light laughter. Phyllis was right. You're indeed a rare and extraordinary person. Only because I stand on the predecessor's shoulders, Roland said with his hands laid out. Let's get to business. We have a common goal, and that is to fight against the demons. The purposes you sent Phyllis out with were, to search for the chosen one and to communicate with the worldly kingdom, am I right? totally, Pasha admitted frankly. At first we wanted to infiltrate secretly, then gradually recruit or control some common people to search for the chosen one. But the failure of the church made us realize another way to success, which is to show ourselves above board and gather all the witches. So you chose Grey Castle as your destination? According to the information that we collected, the sleeping island in fjords possesses the hugest witch organization, the leader of which is your younger sister. Moreover, Grey Castle is a big country which defeated the church, so choosing it as our first destination in search of the chosen one was quite plausible. But I didn't expect that Phyllis would connect with you so soon and bring us an astonishing message. To be honest, I thought it'd take us 2 to 3 years to achieve this. Great. It seems we've saved 2 to 3 years of precious time. Our meeting is worthy of being written into history for this accomplishment alone, Roland said, smiling. It seems so, Pasha also smiled and said, but the premises are that we defeat the demons and then live and prosper in the land of dawn. Sure, as long as the commoners and witches could drop the misunderstandings and cooperate hand in hand, demons aren't an indestructible enemy. Roland paused and said, I could also help you in your search for the chosen one. After all, it's not a bad thing to have one more powerful weapon to compete with the demons, but our cooperation must rest on mutual understandings. What do you think? Agreed. The tentacles on Pasha's body waved tidily. If there is anything you want to know, please just ask, Your Majesty. Roland turned around, looked at Tilly and all the other witches, then said slowly, after hearing about the buried history, my biggest confusion is, what on earth did you find in the ruin? For that, Tequila took on the huge cost of breaking with Starfall City, which then led to the collapse of the Union. This was also one of the key reasons why Roland decided to actively contact the survivors. The technique of soul transfer was something that even modern science and technology could not tackle. The instrument of divine retribution which the witches believed could replace the gods' punishment army plan and thoroughly destruct the demons, must be extraordinary. He would not blindly believe the scientific and technological knowledge he possessed was perfect. Drawing on each other's merits and raising the level together was common sense to modern people. As a matter of fact, he had always wanted to combine the seemingly omnipotent magic power with science and technology. When he saw the witch precisely transmit live images onto the Western Region castle with the aid of the objects taken from the ancient ruin, he was determined that this meeting was absolutely necessary. There was no doubt that this must be beyond the witch's ability limit. Pasha. Are you sure you want to tell him all about it? That's God's secret. We made a big sacrifice too. Instantly, several voices full of worries or dissatisfaction rushed through his mind. Roland then realized that many other Tequila witches were also witnessing this meeting. It's exactly because we've made a big sacrifice. We shouldn't do that in vain. Pasha interrupted the crowd's discussion. If we can't withstand the demon's massive invasion, do you wish for us to bring this secret to the grave, like those tombstones we found? Her loud retort quietened the crowd. It was probably because she made a crucial point, nobody else stood out to object to her anymore. This reaction drew Roland's attention. It seems that what Phyllis said about the survivors was mostly true. They have, to some extent, eliminated the influence of class and status, otherwise, they wouldn't have argued about such a major issue on the spot. But generally speaking, Pasha remains of relatively high prestige among them. Sorry, this information is indeed of vital importance. Pasha's tentacles drooped toward the living room as though they were expressing an apology. Under these circumstances, it can't remain a secret anymore. At least not between each other. After a moment's silence, she added, to be precise, it wasn't that we found the ruin, but it was the ruin which reached out to us. Roland frowned. It reached out to Tequila? Not Tequila, but a time prior to ours, approximately not long after the beginning of the first battle of divine will. By us, does Pasha mean the entire human race? Somehow, Roland felt a chill spreading from under his feet. That was almost 800 years ago. That's true. Unfortunately, we didn't get its meaning then. Pasha sighed. What reached out to us was a civilization. One that had disappeared underground. Chapter 734, The Root of the Divergence. Underground civilization? Roland could not help but think of the turnoffs on the North Slope mine and the cluster of grottos running through the impassable mountain range. In his memory, no geological movement could create such unique landforms. At first, he thought that they were created by some sort of mutant hybrid demonic beasts. But according to what Pasha said, maybe they were traces left by the underground civilization? At that time, people didn't realize it, nor did they intend to communicate with it. Our forms were so different that we even considered them as a new type of demon, which was why there was a huge deviation on the recorded history. It wasn't until the final phase of the Second Battle of Divine Will that there was a breakthrough discovery. Pasha's voice was low and deep. By then, Tequila was the only city left of the three holy cities. The Union had reached a vital moment of survival or extinction. What do you mean by a breakthrough discovery? With the help of the remaining lithograph, the Quest Society figured out the way to store souls and verified it on an unhatched original carrier. Since then, the three chiefs embarked on the research for the transformation of the God's Punishment Army. I know nothing about that, Agatha said surprisingly. Soul transfer was the top secret of the Union. Its classification was even 2 levels higher than that of the God's Punishment Army plan, in which witches were used as the experiment mice. At that time, only the 3 chiefs and a few senior officials knew of it, Pasha replied. I only learned this astonishing information with the fall of Tequila. So Natalia supported the God's Punishment Army plan in the beginning? Roland asked, frowning. What's an original carrier? Because she was left with no choice. As to the latter, it's what we look like right now. Her tentacles drooped more and her body got closer to the light curtain. My weird, ugly shell is the evidence that the underground civilization existed. It's the only tombstone that it left. It's a long story. Your Majesty, please allow me to slowly tell you. Roland nodded, poured himself a glass of chaos drink, leaned back in the chair and began to sense the consciousness transmitted from Pasha. According to the clues on the lithograph, the evanescent civilization left a city in the impassable mountain range. The Quest Society searched for a long time without gaining anything. Then one day it occurred to them that since this civilization was used to moving underground, could this city be built underground as well? After extending the search area, the witches finally found this magnificent city. It consisted of 4 layers with an area of about half the size of Tequila. On each layer there were countless turnoffs and hollow cavities, which were as complex as a maze. Without the guidance of a witch who could sense directions, one could easily get lost and never get out. For this reason, the Quest Society also called it the Maze Ruin. Unfortunately, before the Quest Society could carefully explore it, Tequila was occupied by the demons. Everybody had to escape from home. After paying a heavy price, we finally arrived at the maze. According to our plan, the Union would take away the original carrier stored in the maze, leave for the Hermes Plateau, and then build a new holy city to restore orders at the east coast of the continent. But no one would have guessed what would happen next. Pasha paused and the scales on her body dimmed. Even without looking at her facial expression, Roland could sense the grief in her heart. After quite a while, she resumed transmitting. Although it was after an interval, the Quest Society found the maze ruin that had been preserved in good condition. One can even say that it was an entirely new city. Besides the original carrier, the bottom layer of the ruin stored many unconceivable secrets, the most important 3 of which were the magic core, the central carrier, and the record of the evanescent civilization. Afterwards, the idea came to our minds that as early as the First Battle of Divine Will, the underground civilization had intended to lead us here. Pasha inhaled deeply. The maze ruin was prepared for us. What for? Tilly could not help but ask. For revenge. Another voice appeared in everybody's head. Compared with Pasha, this witch's tone was much colder. It hoped that we could destroy the demons and take revenge for its clan's extinction. It's only Lady Natalia's speculation. It wasn't recorded in the document. Pasha waved her tentacles like shaking a head. It could be that they simply wanted their civilization to be passed down. Anyway, from the remaining record, the Quest Society retrieved many research materials related to God's will and magic power. In order for us to understand the details, most of its conclusions were expressed in lithographs. And the record about the magic core is the very root of the divergence between the Queen of Sunchasur and the Queen of Starfall City. One of the most important messages in the lithographs is, magic power offers infinite possibilities and the pursuit of God's will is the ladder to mastering magic power. Roland sensed the key point coming. What's the magic core? Does it have anything to do with the instrument of divine retribution? You can take the core as an artificial magic cyclone. It's not confined to a witch's body and can adjust its forms at any time. This bizarre device almost overturned the Union's knowledge system. Using one of her tentacles to point at the light curtain, Pasha said, for example, the phantom instrument we're using for our communication is a minor-scaled magic core. When necessary, it can be converted into other instruments. As to the instrument of divine retribution, it's the biggest magic core in the ruin. I see, Roland instantly realized the superiority of this instrument. Compared with the witch's abilities which were inherently unchangeable, the magic core was virtually a universal terminal. Most of all, its effective distance far exceeded the 5-meter limit. Either for production or for military use, it was way more powerful than the witch's. But it's just the primary usage of the magic power. Just as the relationship between the original awakening and the high evolution, the lithograph predicted that with the deepening of the development of magic power, one day we could finally be equivalent to God, Pasha said with a sense of loss as if she was not saying something significant. Instead, she sounded like someone who had lost their way. Roland realized the point of her last words. But you ran out of time. You're right. At first, we didn't know how long it would take for that day to arrive. It could take a century or a millennium. In order to approach the magic core, several Quest Society members had lost their lives. Obviously, witches can't touch those bizarre instruments. We wanted to solve the problem, but didn't know how to do it, so our exploration came to a dead end. The lithograph could only show very limited information. If we were to carry out our research, we had to follow their instructions. Only when there were enough people integrated with the central carrier, could we comprehend their language so as to further read their more profound documents and records. But we didn't have enough time. We'd spent 3 years figuring these things out. Many common people who had joined us earlier tried to get rid of our control, and knowing how many witches were needed to integrate with the carrier remained unknown. But at that time, our resources could only sustain one attempt of research. If it went on like this, the great plan of the Union to restore order would have lost its foundation. The most important thing is that Lady Alice's plan of the God's Punishment Army has an irreconcilable conflict with the concept recorded in the Underground Civilization's documents. If a witch abandons her body to become a God's Punishment warrior, she'll not only lose the chance to be promoted, Pasha paused, then said, but also lose God's will forever. Chapter 735, Legacy of the Civilization. Roland could easily guess what had happened next. After knowing that God's Punishment Army was not the only way to compete with demons on the battlefields anymore, the tequila survivors who didn't want to reduce their own kind to the materials for shells must have caused a great conflict with Alice. Given that, the Battle of Faiths recorded in the written history of the Church probably is just a story made up to cover the truth of this dispute. As for the root of this disagreement, it did not just lie in the difference between the faith in God's Punishment Army and that in the Chosen One. At that moment, all the leaders of the Union must have been very clear that neither of the choices was able to guarantee their victory in the war against demons. According to Phyllis, the plan proposed by the Queen of Starfall City to have God's Punishment Army rest in an everlasting sleep would indeed create 3,000 to 4,000 powerful, experienced extraordinary warriors before the Third Battle of Divine Will, but the survivors of the Union had also noticed a fatal defect in this plan. As souls needed lots of time to adapt to their shells, once this army suffered an inevitable loss during the wartime, it would be impossible for the Union to replace casualties with new warriors in a short time. As a result, this army might only be able to block demons for a decade, or even, by any chance, retrieve the ruined holy city of Tequila, but they could never recapture the whole land of Dawn. As for the choice to search for the chosen one, they had thought it as an even more risky plan because of its extremely slim chance of success. However, they had also seen the benefit of it. If they found the one, human beings would be able to win the war at little cost and would even get closer to the deities based on the records on the lithograph. For the survivors of the Union, searching for the chosen one meant betting on the future while the God's punishment army planned the present. What about the result? Did you defeat the Starfall City? Roland asked. Tequila was not the final winner. No one would be in this conflict. When both sides lose their transcendence, Lady Eleanor stood out to stop this internal disaccord and integrated herself into the central carrier. She was the first witch merging with it. Shocked, Agatha asked, "You mean, in the ruins of the maze, all the three chiefs were?" Pasha said plaintively, "Yes, the Union lost all the three transcendents in this internal struggle. It was also the end of the three chiefs system. As a result, the ruins of the maze became an indispensable part of the Union. Both sides decided to stop fighting and then reached an agreement through negotiation. As agreed, the survivors of Tequila stayed in the ruins studying the magic core, and those of the Starfall City went to Hermes and built a new holy city there. Due to the limited number of the original carriers, the survivors of the Starfall City also agreed to offer us a certain number of empty shells in the next 100 years. We also agreed that if we failed to make a breakthrough in the Chosen One plan or found no leads of her, they would have the right to take back all the research results in the ruins, including the soul containers and the original carriers. They claimed that by then they would come with their God's punishment warriors, and that if we broke the agreement, they would never compromise again." Notice something was wrong here, Roland interrupted. "Wait. After 100 years, the church didn't come to you, did they?" Based on what he knew, in the past hundreds of years, the witches of Tequila had hid underground and never had a say in the world. Meanwhile, all the church's God's punishment warriors had been soulless. Despite the defect in the warriors, the church still greatly outnumbered the Tequila witches, yet it had never sent any troops to the ruins of the maze. Roland wondered whether the church people had totally forgotten about this agreement. Pasha sighed. "For a long time we were unable to know what was going on in Hermes or any other things that happened outside the ruins of the maze, since the original carriers could not be exposed to the sun and the witches who transferred their souls into new bodies needed a long time to adapt to them. When we were able to go outside, we were surprised to discover that they didn't follow Lady Alice's will when building the new order." Agatha said through her teeth, "I knew that. I knew Lady Alice would never create such rules." As compared to her plan of God's punishment army, what the church did was destroying the foundation of the witches. All the Tequila survivors agreed with her at once. Roland waited until they calmed down and changed the subject. "What's a central carrier? Is it different from the original carriers?" Another voice started to explain, "They're all shells. As the living beings of the underground civilization were extremely fragile, they had to live in shells. These things were immortal, but we can't find any detailed information about where they came from in the documents left in the ruins. Based on what we know now, the original carriers are the most common shells, whereas the central carrier, which looks similar to them, stores many unconscious memories. You can consider it as an original carrier which had been used for many years but had no self-awareness. We need to integrate all the memories into it to understand the remaining documented experiment records in the ruins." She sounded soft and elegant, different from Pasha and the angry witch. Listening to this voice, Roland quickly pictured in his head an academic woman who had a long thick braid and wore a pair of black-framed round glasses. He said to her, "Thank you for explaining this to me, My name is Celine, Your Majesty. I was a member of the Quest Society and used to work with Agatha." Agatha got closer to him and whispered in his ear, "I'm not familiar with her. We worked in the same research tower but on different floors. I heard that she was a quiet girl, but every time when it came to magic power, she would become passionate, acting like a totally different person." Hearing this, Roland thought, only someone like this woman would become a faithful follower of Natalia. He cleared his throat and asked her another question, "So, are the witches who merged with the central carrier still alive?" Selim replied, "Not really. Apart from the dozen witches who severely injured in the internal battle, there was another 36 of us who volunteered to follow Lady Eleanor to merge with it. Not everyone was willing to turn into such a monster or spend the rest of her life trapped in a body that can't feel anything. Their sacrifice finally activated the central carrier, but unfortunately, it can only say yes or no in a dialogue but can't make a normal conversation. Roland was intrigued at once. It can answer yes or no to any question? Celine also grew a little more excited. It only answers a question it understands, and it'll respond more quickly if you specify your question. It enables us to mend or adjust the magic core. It's essentially a combination of all the Tequila Witch's willpower. The more witches merge with it, the faster its reaction is. For us, to accompany Lady Eleanor was the last we can do to contribute to the search for the magic power. Meanwhile, Roland was excited about something else. Doesn't the mechanism of input and feedback sound like a primary biocomputer system? If I set all the conditions, will the central carrier be able to solve an equation or complete some complex calculations by itself? I really want to take this thing to Neverwinter and thoroughly study it here. Knowing that it was not the time to make such a request, he decided to put those thoughts aside at this moment and express his wish in future negotiations. He drank all the chaos drink in his cup and said, I see. Now I've got a basic understanding of your situation, but I still have one question. You, the Church and those ancient books have repeatedly mentioned the divine will, and I heard that one could even feel the existence of the deities in a secret chamber exclusive for the Pope on the top floor of a secret temple under the Hermes Plateau. Could you tell me what the divine will is? Chapter 736, The Giant Paintings and the Divine Will. Pasha was astonished at Roland's question for a moment and then said, Phyllis is right. You do know lots about us. As for the divine will, we didn't know much about it until the fall of Tequila, so it's impossible for you to get this information from Agatha. Roland put on some airs by propping his chin with interlaced fingers and said, Don't forget it, the church was defeated by me. All the pure witches who held management positions in the holy city of Hermes now are imprisoned in Neverwinter. I see. With these words, Pasha became silent, as if she were looking at Roland carefully. Even though she had no eyes, he could still felt her gaze. After a long time, Pasha's voice appeared in his head again. I can tell you what the divine will is, but you have to promise you'll keep this secret forever, and so do the others in this meeting. If people are running after or protecting something intangible, they won't easily fall into despair, but when this something becomes tangible, they'll probably get stressed out. I mean, if this information is leaked out, it'll do no good to human beings. Roland made an eye contact with all his witches to confirm that they would keep this secret and then asked in a deep voice, So that's to say, the divine will is something tangible? Pasha slowed down, as if she was talking while recalling. Yes, it looks like a transparent god stone of retaliation, shaped like a spindle apparatus, but it can't affect the use of magic power or has any other special function. As long as you open your heart near it, you'll truly feel the call of the deities and see something incredible. Like what? You'll see an infinitely spacious hall with the bloody moon high above your head and 4 giant paintings around you. The paintings seem to be alive and change all the time, the ancient which described the illusion created by the divine will in detail. Tilly could not help asking, What do those paintings stand for? Hearing this question, all of them held their breath waiting for the answer. Pasha's tentacles stood up at once. This question baffled the people for nearly 1,000 years. The Quest Society kept on looking for the answer but failed. We had no idea about it either until we decoded the contents in the documented records in the ruins of ruins. The 4 paintings the deities showed us respectively represent the mankind, the demons, some unknown enemy and the underground civilization. The shape of the divine will corroborates this speculation, as it's not a complete spindle apparatus but a quarter of a sphere which we called the relic of the deities. Roland knitted his eyebrows. 4 giant paintings and a quarter of the relic of deities. Do you mean every civilization pictured in the paintings has a relic like this? Not everyone. The underground civilization lost its part of the divine will. As a result, one of the paintings showed by the deities is always black. It turned black right after the end of the first battle of divine will. According to the documented records in the ruin of the maze and those in the ancient documents of the Union, we surmise that the underground civilization is already removed from the battle of Divine Will forever. Gooseprickles crawled up everyone's arms when they heard Pasha's answer. They were shocked to learn that all the civilizations had fought for hundreds of years just for some relic, and more importantly, for each civilization, losing its part of relic would mean losing everything. Hearing such a shocking news, Roland knitted his eyebrows even more tightly together. As compared to some unknown enemy in this war, what he cared more about was who had set up the whole thing. He wondered, is it merely an accident or carefully arranged? Did it happen randomly or due to human beings' doomed fate? What's the purpose of leaving behind this relic? Does it have anything to do with the bloody moon which emerges periodically? More importantly, did the tequila survivors understand these things correctly? He was lost in thought and meanwhile felt he caught a vague clue. He thought, what if I replace the word deities in this story with something else? When he was absorbed in thought, Tilly asked, if we collect all of the 4 parts of the relic, what will happen? Didn't the deities give you any guidance? Pasha calmly replied, no one knows the answer, and the deities have never responded to our calls. The deities don't love people. They only favor the winner. Wendy exclaimed in disbelief, how come, we fought for hundreds of years just because of a useless stone? The divine will is, so cruel. The ancient witch tried to comfort her. So it appears. I hope these words in the documented records in the ruins of the maze will solve your question, although they are quite hard to understand. All of us are the deity's children, but only a few of us will be able to see the dawn. Since we sensed magic power, we've been destined to lead a life uncommon. This competition has lasted for a long period of time. We are already 1 in 1,000 elite. Birds weren't birds, and we weren't us. Fighting makes things thrive, and competition makes living beings eternal. Something flashed across Roland's mind like a bolt of lightning. He abruptly interrupted, what did you say? All of us are the deity's children? No, something after this. Scroll replied, this competition has lasted for a long period of time. We are already 1 in 1,000 elite. Your Majesty, I've memorized all of it. What does that sound like? This thing described by the underground civilization resembles the process of evolution. From barbaric period to civilized age, every civilization that exists now has defeated numerous opponents during its development course. And all the 4 different civilizations we know have a thing in common, which is they all know how to use magic power. Among human beings, witches are the ones who can use this kind of power, and demons and the underground civilization seem to be even better at controlling it. Given that, the other unknown enemy must also be able to use it. If that's true, everything will be consistent with the underground civilization's description. The children in this sentence, all of us are the deity's children, probably refers to the species who were gifted to manipulate magic power. In this way, the battles of divine will aren't caused by the deity's relic. Instead, they are just a means of accelerating evolution or the basic rules of this magic world. This also corroborates the underground civilization's conclusion that elevating magic power is the way to get closer to the deities. Pasha's voice reverberated across Roland's head. Your Majesty, are you all right? I feel your mind is a little out of order. Oh? Are you able to see what I'm thinking? No, I can only know what you are thinking when you are ready to communicate with me through your mind. For example, now I'm willing to talk with you through my mind, so you are able to hear what I'm thinking. Pasha paused for a while and asked, it'll be more efficient to communicate that way. Do you want to give it a try? Roland shook his head, smiling. No, I prefer to express myself using my throat and my tongue. As for the confusion, I just thought of something interesting. But relax, it won't affect our communication. Thinking that sometimes rules were just rules and there might not be a reason for them, he felt it was acceptable to consider them as something created by the deities. As far as he knew, the origin of life and the Cambrian explosion on Earth were also puzzling things. Life is said to form out of lightning and boiling water where organic molecules constantly collided, merged and split and then formed a molecular chain which could reproduce itself. The chance of that is as slim as that of a hurricane assembling a Benz sports car by whirling lots of metal parts into the air. As for the Cambrian explosion, it was even more mysterious. A sea which only had had some simple creatures such as algae and mollusk for several 100 million years seemed to be filled with various kinds of animals overnight. In a short span of time in the Cambrian period, most major animal phyla of the Earth appeared in a sudden. No matter how living beings on the Earth evolved in the following years, they can all be traced back to their origins that formed in this period of time. As these two great changes which gave a strong impetus to the species' evolution on the Earth are both events of extremely low probability, some people attribute them to some mysterious power beyond description. They believe that it's an invisible hand that pushed the world on the Earth to develop into what it's like today. What about this strange magic world? Does such power really exist in here? Chapter 737, The Leader. Roland was clear that it was nothing but his own speculation. I can't jump to a conclusion based solely on the documentation of the underground civilization since their contents still need further verification. For example, the underground civilization thought that they successfully survived a series of competition, but what about their opponents who probably were also able to use magic power? Where did they leave their traces? What about human beings? Did witches first appear before the first battle of divine will, or rather, was the mankind gifted with the sense of magic when they were still primates or even at the beginning of the mammalian age? Maybe, human beings in this world didn't go through such a long process of evolution at all. Could they directly become what they are now through mutation after gaining a victory? He was afraid that to answer these questions, he would need a great number of outstanding explorers like Thunder. As compared to those researches, his top priority still remained to be human survival, but he believed that it was just a matter of time for him to find out the answers. He looked at Pasha, asking, "Before you moved this part of Relic underground, had it been kept by the church, no, I mean the Starfall City all the time?" Now that he knew the importance of the relic, he started to care about its safety. Yes. Due to the existence of the giant paintings, burying it underground can't prevent the divine will. Therefore, it's always kept by the most powerful witch organization. During the months of demons when magic power reaches its peak, demonic beasts will come for it. That was why they launched frenzied attacks at Hermes during those months before. With these words, Pasha moved her giant body away, revealing the scene behind her. Two piles of dead bodies of demonic beasts stood there with light blue blood dripping down and flowing all over the ground. Pasha continued, "After we knew the Starfall City had suffered a serious setback, we took back the relic as soon as we could. Now it's very safe in our hands." Wendy gasped at the sight. "How did you kill that many hybrid demonic beasts?" "The instrument of divine retribution can deprive the targets of their magic power, and these monsters will die soon without the power in their bodies." Pasha briefly described how this instrument worked and continued. "But it'll only become a mighty weapon when it's activated by the Chosen One." Roland caught the keyword immediately. Deprive them of their magic power? So does it mean that it'll do no harm to normal animals? Can God's stones influence the instrument? No, it directly affects magic power, and God's stones can't do anything about it at all. Learning that this instrument could affect an area within a radius of over 5,000 miles without causing any side effects to living beings without magic power, Roland had to admit it was really an environmentally friendly weapon. Unfortunately, however, its startup requirements seemed too harsh. He wondered whether the underground civilization had really tested this instrument's power or not. Maybe they've just done it in theory? Otherwise, they wouldn't end up losing its relic in the war. Wait, did they create something they couldn't use? This kind of absurd things will only happen in this strange magic world. Thinking that the underground civilization had an advanced magic theory and demons were able to cultivate various kinds of abilities, he realized human beings seemed to have no advantage in manipulating magic power at all. The witches were not a stable group. Their awakenings happened randomly among people and their abilities were hard to predict and control. Given that, he believed they still need a long time to evolve, but now there was not much time left for human beings. Roland suspected that by the time the Tequila witches found the Chosen One, Neverwinter's armies equipped with advanced steel weapons had already gained an upper hand in the war against demons. Despite all those thoughts, he would never try to deny the existence of magic power in this world. He decided to carry out research on both science and magic power at the same time. In this way, the new findings of magic power would increase their productivity. In the meantime, the development of productivity would generate more resources for the studies on magic power. He believed all research projects could be successfully carried out as long as there was plenty of money and manpower, including the one on magic power. Now that he knew the basic situation of the tequila survivors, he thought it was time to negotiate with them. He said, "Pasha, thank you for telling me your situation and research results. As demons are obviously our common enemy, we should work together and pool our resources to fight against them. How about we building a united front of divine will to further our cooperation and coordination?" Pasha tapped with her tentacles. "I agree. We only hope your majesty will continue your policy to gather more witches. All the tequila witches want is to find the chosen one among them. We'll send another god's punishment which to bring you a new 5-colored stone. I'll continue the policy anyway. Even if you don't say that, I'm still going to expand the witch organization in my kingdom, but," he paused for a while. "I think you'd better move to another place, such as the western mountains near Neverwinter." Well. Before Pasha gave her answer, all the witches in the reception hall stirred. "Your Majesty? What about demonic beasts?" At this moment, all the witches were staring at him. Some seemed worried and some nervous. Only Agatha gave him an approving look as if she had known that he was going to make such a request. Roland surveyed them and signaled the witches to calm down and relax. After that, he turned to look at Pasha on the light curtain again and said, "To be honest, I can't agree with your plan to protect the relic on your own. Once you lose it, all human beings' efforts will be wasted. Demonic beasts aren't tough enemies, but without the defensive line in Hermes, are you sure you can protect the relic when demons launch a surprise attack on you?" Having heard that the underground civilization diminished probably because they lost its part of the relic, he thought it was better to put this thing under his own protection or somewhere near him. He would feel better if he would be able to send an army to support them immediately when they were attacked. Celine seemed to be disagreeable. "As long as we change the Annihilation Core, demons will become easy targets as demonic beasts." "No, they won't. Demons are way more powerful and intelligent than demonic hybrids. I can tell from the packed dead bodies that those demonic beasts were once very close to your core region. If I guess correctly, the instrument of divine retribution isn't far away from the phantom instrument." Roland noticed that the little tentacles on Pasha stiffened for a moment when she heard this sentence. "If some mad demons who can throw spears attack you guys, how many magic cores will be able to remain intact?" "But," Roland continued to explain patiently, "if you still think I won't do any better than you or worry about that demonic beasts would be attracted by the relic, you can settle down on the side of the western mountains close to the fertile plains and I'll build a road to connect your place with Neverwinter. In that case, I'll be able to help you whenever you're in trouble. Trust is the foundation of cooperation, and placing the relic where both parties regard as safe is the first step to build our mutual trust, isn't it?" Pasha remained speechless with her tentacles intertwined with those of the other blobs. They seemed to be communicating with each other rapidly in this way. After 7 or 8 minutes, she started to talk again. "Before I give our reply, I'd like to ask a question first. If we do form a united front of divine will as you said, who'll lead us to fight against demons?" Chapter 738, Only One Leader. Surprised by this sudden question, Roland fell silent for a moment and then asked with a smile, "You seem to have something else to say?" Pasha replied, "As this united front is related to the survival of all human beings, we hope that every decision we make here can be given full consideration. To this end, we the survivors of Tequila suggest we adopt a co-governance mechanism for the united front. Under such a system, all decisions will be jointly made by the heads of the most powerful groups after negotiation. By doing so, we'll be able to avoid misjudgment and ensure an equal interest of every party." It sounds like the Union's three chiefs system." The ancient witch further explained, a triumvirate can ensure a quick and well-balanced decision-making process, but it's not the only choice. Regarding the current situation, we'd better build a system to include the 4 kingdoms and all the witch organizations. In the early days of the Union, there were 11 leaders planning our military campaigns at the Round Table. Hearing this, Roland had to admit they were quite clever in this matter, since this co-governance mechanism they proposed would surely guarantee their own status in the United Front. At this moment, except his Grey Castle, all the kingdoms and witch organizations such as the Witch Union and Sleeping Island could hardly compete with the tequila survivors who had taken over all the magic power instruments left by the underground civilization and owned over 100 gods' punishment witches. They had accumulated rich fighting experiences during a decades-long battle against demons and were overwhelmingly powerful when fighting with other witches and common armies. Roland believed that if he agreed, the tequila witches would naturally become one of the policymakers of the co-governance system. They would further ensure their own interests by stressing their identities as witches to gain recognition from and establish good relationships with the other witch organizations. He thought that they made such a request probably because they wanted to protect themselves, not because they were planning something like restoring their rule over human beings or overthrowing the kingdoms. He understood that every group would be prudent and want such a self-protecting measure before joining in a large organization. If he had been the old Prince Roland who had recently become a lord of Border Town, he would have accepted this suggestion of the tequila witches, but now he was different. With an air of authority, he said, "An interesting suggestion, but the United Front won't adopt a co-governance mechanism. It'll have only one leader. That is me. This is the most efficient and reliable way of managing it." He agreed that modesty was a virtue, but also knew that now was not the right time for him to be humble, since he was clear that the 3-chiefs system might be a good choice for the Union but not for him. He was the only one in this world who knew what industrialization was and how to make the best use of all the resources in his domain. To see rapid industrialization, he had to make all his administrative departments do what he said and work together like a set of machines toward the same goal. He wanted that every order issued by his city hall to smoothly reach all his subjects and all the resources within his domain to be allocated and managed in accordance with his plan. Adopting a co-governance system under which he would have to explain and convince all the other policymakers to carry out a policy obviously would slow down the process of industrialization. Seeing Roland reject tequila's idea outright and bluntly, all the people in the meeting fell into an awkward silence, including those ancient witches. Roland cleared his throat and calmly continued. "The United Front is built to guarantee that we'll work together to fight against demons, but I don't require you to join in it at the very beginning. I want you to move to the Western region to build mutual trust first. As compared to some oral agreement, the facts you'll see here will be more convincing." "What are we going to see?" He explained, "You're going to see our strength and determination to fight against demons and the current situation of some other organizations, both those that are a part of the United Front and those not. After that, you can make a decision to join in or not. Even if you don't join in, we'll still be able to cooperate on many other projects, such as experiments and the search for the chosen one. I promise I won't interfere with your internal affairs." Celine interrupted, "You won't mind if we don't give you the relic and the magic core?" "No, and in fact, I've never planned to depend on those instruments in the ruins of the maze to defeat demons. Regarding the relic, as long as it's kept in a safe place, I won't have a problem with it. Like I said, working together to look for the chosen one and protect the relic is the first step to build our mutual trust. As for further cooperation, we can take it slow." The cold voice which remained silent for a long time appeared again. "I've got to say you're very uncommon, you common man, but have you ever thought that controlling the United Front on your own can be very risky? If the Battle of Divine will last decades and during this period of time you inevitably become old and weak, how can you ensure that your successors will follow your will to lead us in the war? Only a co-governance mechanism can effectively prevent such a problem. I don't think it'll be a problem at all. I'm not sure how long will the war last, but I'm afraid my life will be longer than all of yours combined." At this moment, he felt he needed to bluff, although he was not sure whether he had got Zero's lifespan, as he obviously did not get her magic power. He knew that to convince these ancient witches, he had better explain his decision with some incredible power rather than persuading them that a special system which they had never heard of would guarantee that his successors would carry on his work. He described to them the soul battlefield in detail, and many witches chimed in. After that, there was a long silence. He saw that the tentacles of the blobs knotted together again and the scales on their bodies turned from grayish-brown to reddish-brown, which indicated that they had a heated discussion now. After a long time, their tentacle hung down. Pasha said solemnly, "I understand, but we need at least a month to move all the things we need. I hope you can offer us some building materials, as one cave isn't enough for all our things. We need to build a palace and a laboratory inside the Western Mountains." Roland was surprised and asked, "Wait a minute, how can you build something like that underground?" It was not easy to conduct an underground construction, for the environment below the earth was wet and dark. As such, he had planned to ask Lotus to connect some underground caves in the Western Mountains for the tequila survivors, since their bodies would not require very comfortable living conditions. However, they seemed to have mastered better construction skills than him and even planned to build a new palace underground. Pasha explained, "Our devouring worm will do the job. It's a big shell looking like a wild beast. We've got one in the ruins. That was the shell we used to sneak into the City of Glow in the Kingdom of Dawn." Chapter 739, The Handshake. Roland felt a jolt, thinking, why do these things sound similar to the giant demonic beast in the Snow Mountain? When he was about to raise this question, Agatha asked Pasha, "Are you the ones who entered the Devil's Town and devoured the Blackstone Pagoda?" Pasha was confused, saying, "Devil's Town? No, we didn't. We've only used our devouring worm to mend the ruins and build the tunnel to the City of Glow. We can't afford to use it so frequently since it eats a lot." Roland described the witches' adventures in the Misty Forest and the Devil's Town located to the west of the Western region. After that, he asked Scroll to take out the pictures of the scenes drawn by Soraya and explained, "This monster, much bigger than any wild beast, seemed to move toward the Great Snow Mountain." Seeing the vivid pictures, Pasha took a deep breath and said, "Yes, it's indeed a devouring worm. I'm afraid that there are also some ruins left by the underground civilization in the Snow Mountain you mentioned. According to the literatures we read here, this civilization once could be found everywhere in the Land of Dawn. This record is reliable, as now we can easily find tracks and numerous tunnels left by devouring worms in every high mountain. But you think the underground civilization has already perished?" "Yes, we do, but the worm was just a shell like an original carrier. A soul can get into it and then move it." Hearing this, Roland's heart sank in a sudden. He glanced around and found all the witches in the reception hall looked solemn at this moment. Obviously, everybody guessed that the one who sent the worm to Agatha's research tower and the Devil's Town must be the unknown enemy in the Battle of Divine Will. Roland wondered whether this enemy had happened to find the ruins and some worm shells in the Snow Mountain and transfer souls into those shells. If this was the case, he believed it would not be a big problem. However, if they had also found some magic cores and a central carrier, he believed he would have big trouble. Will these things drastically improve their magic theory and even enable them to create some instrument of divine retribution against the witches? He thought they had an excellent chance of finding some shells and even instruments in the Snow Mountain. Unlike the impassable mountain range and the Dragon's Pine mountain range, it did not stretch very long, but its major peak was the highest mount in the western region. According to Pasha, such a great mountain was a perfect place to build a large underground city for the underground civilization. Given this, he decided that he must do something about it. Celine anxiously said, "Your Majesty, please assist us in exploring the Snow Mountain as soon as possible, in case there are some remaining instruments. And the various kinds of shells recorded in the literature. If the unknown enemy gets them, I'm afraid it would cause us lots of trouble." Compared to Celine, Pasha still sounded calm, but all her tentacles were waving rapidly, showing her anxiety inside. This news apparently caused a stir among the blobs, as it was getting noisy behind Pasha. Roland quickly got why they were so excited. Living in the gods' punishment warriors' bodies for hundreds of years resembled being imprisoned in endless emptiness, which explained why they were so interested in the new carriers. However, compared with living in the bodies of God's punishment army, the carriers at least enabled them to have some feelings, including a sense of smell, though they would not look like human beings anymore. Roland pretended to hesitate, saying, "I see your point. I'd been planning to explore the snow mountain of the western region, but as I didn't have any suitable means of transport and didn't want the witches to take any risk, I had to postpone in the end. If I could get the help from your devouring worm for this exploration, I think it'll be a good opportunity." Pasha immediately promised, "We'll start to move as fast as we can." Roland, who had been thinking about how to start the cooperation with the tequila survivors, was also happy to get this chance. In fact, even if they didn't ask him to explore the mountain, he would do it sooner or later in order to eliminate potential threats around Neverwinter and satisfy his own curiosity toward the big carriers which were able to drill huge tunnels underground. He could easily think of a long list of things these carriers could do. He had planned to use the impassable mountain range as a natural barrier against the demons, but current engineering techniques did not allow him to do so. The transportation of cement and bricks alone would be a tricky problem, as the mountain paths were rugged and sinuous and the weather condition there was very unstable. If some soldiers were garrisoned on the mountains, he would have to build barbette for them. Near the military facilities, he would also need to build barracks, roads, and necessary living facilities, which would be a big challenge for Hummingbird and Lotus. However, if he had a devouring worm, he could solve all those problems by drilling a straight underground tunnel connecting the barbette on the mountain with Neverwinter and building underground ammunition reservoir and barracks which could keep them away from the snowstorm. He could even build a railroad in the tunnel so that steam trailers could be used to transport soldiers and goods. With reinforced concrete blockhouses on the ground and convenient transportation lines underground, that would be the natural chasm defense line he wanted. This devouring worm could also be used to build underground utilities and sewage discharge system for the city. When that happened, he would proudly announce that in this age, Neverwinter was the first city to have an underground drainage system in which people could walk freely. He believed that this worm would be praised highly as a magic tool in the civil engineering field before the invention of tunnel boring machine and would be considered as important as the magic core and the biocomputer. Roland rose and walked to the light curtain, extending his right hand toward Pasha. "I hope this is the beginning of building our mutual trust." "Your Majesty, this is." He looked at this monster who was several meters taller than himself and calmly explained, "It's a handshake, representing a preliminary agreement between us." After a little hesitation, Pasha dropped the thickest tentacle on her head. It moved in a spiral and touched his palm in the end. He thought, what a pity. Soraya isn't here to witness and record this moment worthy being memorized forever. When the image of Pasha started to distort, he suddenly asked, wait, you said every high mountain might have ruins left by the underground civilization. What about the mountains in the deep sea?" Pasha was surprised, saying, "Are there mountains under the sea?" According to the literature, they did not go to the sea and only lived on the land of dawn. "I think they might not be able to move around in the sea, as most of their carriers were heavy and clumsy." "Why did you ask about this?" "Nothing, I'm just curious." Roland shook his head and lost in thoughts. They only lived on the land of dawn, so the weird underwater spire and telescope have nothing to do with the underground civilization, but who owns the giant stone gates that Thunder saw through the old telescope and the land which only appears during flood tide? The unknown enemy in the battle of divine will? I hope Thunder can find the answer. At this moment, the purple light curtain distorted and then disappeared. The reception hall got back to normal. Chapter 740, A Beautiful Night. As night fell, Wendy went to the door of Scroll's bedroom. She held out her hand, hesitating whether she should knock or not. However, just at that moment, Scroll opened the door. "I knew you would come find me." Scroll smiled. "I also wanted to talk to you, just like we used to." Scroll had apparently taken an early shower as her long, wet hair was randomly hanging over her shoulders instead of being tied up. She had also placed a towel on her shoulders in order to avoid getting her night robe wet. At first glimpse, she appeared to be a little younger, with her flowing hair covering the wrinkles on her forehead. After leading an increasingly comfortable life in Neverwinter, she looked more mellow. Only her wise and mature eyes remained unchanged. Wendy could not help smiling and asked, "In your bedroom or mine?" "Yours. Nightingale will come back much later than Leaf." "Okay. You serve the chaos drinks." "What?" "Of course you do. Whoever initiates the conversation is also responsible for the drinks. That's our old rule and you know it." "So that's why you waited for me behind the door?" "That's right. Patience is the most important thing and also one of the lessons I'll draw from life. Now, have you learned your lesson?" "Fine." As they went back to Wendy's bedroom and cleared up the desk, Wendy took 2 glasses and a bottle of chaos drink out of a drawer and poured it into the glasses. The orange-red drinks reflected a flame-like light against the light from the magic stone. "That's what you got." Scroll took a sip of it. "You're lucky. In winter, it's as good as fire dragon wine." "I'm jealous of you." Wendy stretched her hands. "Don't put it like that. We can enjoy such a drink thanks to Miss Evelyn." Roland figured out a very interesting way to distribute the chaos drinks of various tastes to each witch of the Witch Union. Each witch in each month had an opportunity to pick up a bottle of the chaos drinks created by Evelyn. No one knew what kind of flavor they would get as they would only see a number before the draw was revealed. Therefore, on that day, the witches used to exchange their drinks or drink others. Somehow, Maggie always got the most popular drink, making everyone wonder if Evelyn had revealed it to her. As they took their time to enjoy the orange-red drink that warmed their hearts, they heard the sound of the cold wind outside the windows. They felt tipsy in the warm bedroom. They talked little as they could understand each other just by looking at one another. In fact, Wendy had nothing specific to say and just felt very happy at the moment. When she closed her eyes, Roland Wimbledon's earlier declaration would appear in her mind. "Only I can be the leader." Before this, Roland, in her opinion, was very approachable. She was concerned that he would mess up or show weakness on some critical issues, which was unbecoming of a king. But now, he was much better than she had expected. Judging from his tone and expression in dealing with other people, he had become more mature and developed his compelling authority thanks to the last 2 years of experience. To her surprise, Roland was much better at being a dominator. Even so, he treated the witches and common people the same as before. It seemed that it was his nature to be nice to witches, which was very odd, especially for a royal noble. She knew that Scroll also had felt this change, so she had waited at the door for her. It was a habit they had kept since they were in the Witch Cooperation Association. When they had some good news to share, Wendy, Scroll, and Kara would always get together to drink some cheap ale and talk about it overnight. However, they had to drink wild fruit water instead of ale when their conditions became worse later on. Sadly, they gradually talked about their concerns and problems instead of good news or plans because Kara had a different purpose from them, leaving Wendy and Scroll behind. As the eldest witches and the founders of the Witch Cooperation Association, Wendy and Scroll had to be strong because if they gave up, all witches would lose their faith in seeking for Holy Mountain. That was how they survived through all the suffering and tough times. And now, those times became the past once more. Wendy drank out of the drink, let out a deep sigh, and said, "Well, after the meeting, I handed the test results of the witches from the Kingdom of Wolfheart to His Majesty." "Oh? What kind of abilities do they have?" Scroll leaned on the bench and replied casually. Wendy gave a general description of each of their abilities but was deliberately vague when it came to Broken Sword. "Can you guess who he assigned Broken Sword to?" Probably Nightingale or Ashes, only they can make full use of Broken Sword's power." After some more thought, Scroll said, "Anna and Leaf indeed have strong magic power, but they and other witches aren't able to fight against enemies face to face. Additionally, there are few combat witches in the Witch Union. Great minds think alike, but His Majesty didn't think so." Wendy revealed her gentle smile. "He didn't assign Broken Sword to anyone." Scroll was stunned. "Why?" "According to him, a weapon needs to be carried by the owner personally at all times, but in that case, Broken Sword would have limited freedom. Besides, the enemies won't always launch an attack at her working time and her sword's aura isn't as powerful as gunpowder." Hence, she can partner with each witch to test their overlapping effects rather than to be a weapon. Then, based on how interesting the combination is, His Majesty will assign her job. Assign her a job based on how interesting the combination is? Yeah, those were His Majesty's words exactly. He attached more importance to her feelings instead of giving her a role that limited her. Perhaps, that was the reason why Nightingale chose to support him with her wholeheartedly. Now in hindsight, it was fortunate that they chose to believe Nightingale's judgment. Thinking of this, Wendy could not help smiling. After filling her glass again, she held it before Scroll. To us, for finding such a good king. Scroll smiled, holding the glass to gently clink hers. Yes, to our holy mountain. Ah, it's empty. Having drunk the last sip, she found that the bottle had been emptied out when she wanted to fill the glass again. Do you want me to return to my room to get mine? Scroll also wanted to continue drinking. No, we must follow the old rule. She waved her hands and took a bottle from another drawer. But next time, I'll wait for you to knock on my door. Wait a moment. Isn't that Nightingale's? Yes, but she doesn't mind at all. They cheered up again and continued to talk on this warm and wonderful night.